and welcome to another episode of the Culture Clash. I'm your host, Michael. I'm joined this weekend, by the wonderful Tim Hallam. Right? I got the
That's
pronunciation
right.
right.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
got it right.
awesome.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right?
I think we can. Yeah,
That's good. I can't hear myself, but that's I'm no stranger to that. It's that's better.
yeah. I turned on the.
Oh, I'm there. That's good.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, that's beautiful. And well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here.
Yeah. So what we do again for first-time listeners, which every week I assume we have a couple. This is a show where we talk about almost anything when a guest comes in, whatever is of interest, whatever. But we start off usually talking just about the idea of multiculturalism and cultures clashing. The show is called Culture Clash for that reason,
Clash.
and so a bit about myself in a nutshell. Again, I've lived in Turkey for 10 years, almost. I'm rounding up now. I was in Konya, and then for the last 8 years, Istanbul, and I was in Palestine doing refugee work directly before coming. And I'm a Turkish citizen now, so I got dual citizenship. My wife is Turkish; she's in the U.S., struggling with that, with her own clashing. And it's just something. This has been a dream of mine, to travel the world and to kind of experience other things. I felt as a minority growing up, so being a minority is really comfortable to me. And so I just like to meet other people who've got their own stories, and no one's here without something interesting that led them to be here at this particular moment. So, Tim, I'm excited to talk about it and share with the audience a bit about your story. So, yeah.
Well, what happened? I've been here for 12 years, and I met a lovely lady called Elif, and we got married, and came over here in 2008. It was on the 8th of the 8th, '08. And
It's easy to remember,
it
right?
was the first day of the Chinese Olympics. So that was
Well, that's, yeah.
bit of
So,
good
it's
karma.
auspicious.
It was auspicious, yeah. And as little attention as I paid to the sort of Chinese guys that were sort of on the vaults and things like that, I was more concentrating on staying alive because, of course, I came from Merry England, where they drive on the other side of the road. So I was just making sure I make look the right way before I crossed the road. That was the most sort of basic thing, I think, when I first arrived here.
And that's, I don't think the British get enough sympathy for that because I think, at least in the U.S., it's always about going to the U.K. and suffering that.
Uh-huh.
But I've never heard anyone actually really say, it must be tough for Brits to go abroad and have exactly that same problem in so many other places. Because for us, it's localized. If you don't go to the UK,
Sure.
you don't have that problem so much.
Yeah, I mean, you have to really think about it. I mean, now I have to be careful. I have to walk pretty close to the wall if I go to England because then I'm looking the other way now. But yeah, it's quite a difficult thing to adapt to. And also, I mean, the way that people drive here. I think that was the single biggest thing when I first arrived in Turkey. Like the way, Istanbul's a beautiful city and the sun shines a lot. And it was the middle of August. It was red hot, but then it's the minibus life where you're hanging on for dear life and going around corners, and I just take that for granted now. But the other month my sister came, and she just couldn't believe it. We got on a minibus and her face went white. She was like, "How do you do this?" And it was like, "Oh, this is normal,
Yeah. I mean, if this doesn't happen, it's actually boring. This is the only thing that livens it up.
Well, it does. I mean, it's also, I think, just the concept of road in general, because we have in Turkey, I remember being in a taxi going up a hill, and it was like one of those really steep hills that we have in Istanbul.
Yeah, like around Bebek and stuff going up.
Yeah, this was, I think this was more around the Levant, but it was, an unmetalled road, we'd call it in England, but, on a hill, in a taxi that was doing about 5,000 revolutions per minute trying to get up this thing. And just skidding around, and you just think, wow, this is living, I think if you're just going around London in a black cab, that's existing, but this is living.
Well, the challenge is what makes it worth waking up the next day, right? You did something. You got up that hill. That taxi didn't blow
right.
up.
I mean, everything here is like an adventure. It's like this afternoon I came over to Koch here, this lovely place.
Yeah. Coach University. This is Coach University Radio. I should probably say that at the beginning of every show.
Well, just in case they didn't know they were listening to you. And I mean, the thing is, like I say, I've lived here for 12 years, but Istanbul's like a country. You can go sort of 5 or 10 years without going to a place and sort of go down the road and think, oh yeah, I remember that bit. But just came by the sea this afternoon, walked down to the university, saw all the tower and everything through the trees. And
Yeah, you get to see the Black
beautiful,
Sea over the
absolutely.
trees.
Yeah. So I've seen 2 different seas just getting here this afternoon. There's not many cities you can do that.
I mean, it's. I mean, I used to do it regularly. I used to go over to the Asian side and back and forth. I lived on the Asian side for a year, and for spoiler alert for people who haven't been to Istanbul before, it literally does span across 2 continents. So
Yeah.
you take the ferry.
Yeah.
It's 15 minutes, 10 minutes on the shortest route, I think, or less, maybe even like a 5-minute ferry just going the shortest route across.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's you're aware of it. You know, it's a different. It's not. It's the same city, the same people mostly, because everyone has to go back and forth. But you are just really kind of aware of the geography. Istanbul is defined by its geography, maybe more than many other cities. I mean, I don't know. Like London's got the Thames, but is that the only
Thames? The Thames.
Thames.
It
Sorry,
looks
the
like
Thames.
Thames. People get that all mixed up with the Thames or the Thames, which I can never work out why they call it Thames and where they get Thames from Thames and all that sort of thing. But it's not the same. I mean, I guess there's always going to be a sort of sense of place when you've got any kind of body of water. It always sort of defines a city, doesn't it? But I think in Istanbul, it's very. I think if you arrive somewhere like Üsküdar or, I mean, again, Karakoy is on the Asian side, but I know when I first went to Üsküdar, I just kind of, I got off the ferry and, 5 minutes from Beşiktaş, and you think, well, this is very different.
Yeah. I mean, they've done it up now. They've made it a lot more tourist friendly.
Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, anytime they do up a neighborhood, it all kind of looks the same after a while. Like it's not. I mean, I don't want to be one of those old timey expats that I met when I first came, who kind of like gripe about why. 30 years ago when I came, it meant something. Yeah, it meant something to be here because people were dying. People were freezing because everyone was having to burn coal and it was smoggy. I heard people complain about that it used to mean something, an accomplishment when they went back home to say, I live in Istanbul. And now they were annoyed that there's metros and there's gas in every home and there's drinkable water in the last 30 years, and that their friends aren't impressed anymore when they come.
It makes life simpler. I mean, I still think it's pretty chaotic, to be honest. I mean, they're still building a lot of the metro, but I know if ever I used to do anything on the Asian side, back in the day, it would be a complete nightmare trying to work out what the minibuses were doing, because I think there were. Do you remember there was somebody drew? They got lots of coloured pens, like biro pens, and just scribbled on a map of Istanbul all these different colours. And at the top they just put this is the minibus map.
I've never seen, to be honest, I would love to see one, because one of the things that puts me off of using the minibuses, the dolmuşes as we call them locally, is that if I don't know exactly where I'm going, I can't trust that minibus is taking me where I think it's taking me. So I'm kind of stuck where the minibus is only when I know how to walk there.
Yeah.
So for a long time, I stuck to metro, tram, and anything that was a straight line that I could easily, I would never be lost because I'd be on it.
Well, that was it. That's the other thing, because I mean, it's difficult to sort of think back that far. But when I first came here, my wife works near the İşbank building. You know the one that's sort of in the middle of
in Levant.
Yeah. And to me, I mean, I came and I didn't know İşbank, and I just saw this big building that looked a little bit, I don't know, looked a bit American, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that sort of confirmed it was the logo at the top looked like a dollar sign.
Yeah.
So I call it the dollar sign building. So in this sort of urban jungle, I knew that I was near to where I needed to be if I could see that building. That was an indication of where I should get off the bus.
And I think that's human evolution right there. Like just, the tallest tree, the pyramid, some other just notable landmark. You just you naturally orient towards.
Definitely. And I always, I always sort of smile a wry smile if I go past it now. I mean, I know pretty much more around it now, but if ever somebody was to kidnap me and sort of dump me in the middle of somewhere, İşbank would be the first thing I would look for.
I used to live right behind Safir AVM, which is the tallest building in the country. I don't know if it still is, but it was as of a few years ago.
I
So,
remember that being built.
oh really?
I do.
I was
It's
nowhere
all
near.
fields.
I was nowhere near that neighborhood in my first few years.
Yeah.
I definitely grew into that business corridor from central to northern Istanbul, and because so I lived in Zeytinburnu. So I came from Konya. Yeah, I came from Konya. That's the first city I lived in. It's Anatolian for those who don't know.
Mm.
Very Anatolian, kind of famously one of the main cities of Anatolia throughout the centuries. Has a pretty distinct culture, a very religious culture. They had a Sufi leader there, a sect founded there under Mevlana Rumi, which is internationally famous. So amazing how many people you meet who know of him. And I knew of the name before I came to Turkey, though I didn't know anything about Konya before I came. And then coming from Konya for me was pretty familiar and pretty relaxed coming from Arab countries, not because they're Arabs or they're that much like Arabs, but the family structure, the way people drink the tea, like that stuff is very Mediterranean, I think, and very Eastern Mediterranean. So there wasn't that big change there. It's just the city is so much wealthier than even Amman, where I was before. Like the people are wealthier. There was so much more diversity on the street and social classes and ethnicities. So the culture clash for me happened mostly coming from Konya to Istanbul, rather than coming from
Well, that's
southern
interesting.
countries into Turkey directly.
Yeah, I think I mean Istanbul was really my first big dose. So after that, yeah, I mean the biggest one for me is probably the opposite. I went to Diyarbakir.
Yeah, which is
That
different
was,
culture.
I mean, that was before it got pummeled a little bit about 4 or 5 years ago, but it was just before that. So I always felt that that was when I went there. It was sort of the furthest. It felt a lot further away than Istanbul, if you know what I mean.
I would, yeah. I've never been, but I mean, again, for people who don't know, Diyarbakir is, I think, considered the capital of Kurdish culture. Um, and yeah, it's kind of in the southeasterly part
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Turkey, a bit north of, like, it's not on the border specifically, but yeah, it has a different culture. Kurdish people natively have a different language, and there's just a lot of
Yeah.
political things,
So,
social things wrapped up in that issue that on a university radio show in most countries you could talk about, but not in Turkey. Yeah, university radio is delightfully accommodating, but they just want you to, just keep it topical.
exactly.
So
that we will.
yeah, certainly. So, so what keeps you busy in Istanbul? And
Well,
actually, so you got a radio show.
I've got a radio show.
For a long time, you've had a radio show.
For a very long time. Yes, I've had a radio show for 10 and a quarter years now, Açık Radio, which is based now in Tophane.
In Tophane?
Yeah, Tophane. And it's sort of a purpose-built place. We used to be, what's that place called near Gezi Park? It was like the other side of there. It begins with an H.
Harbiye.
Harbiye. Used to be there, and it was, this was when I first started it. It was above a bank, and it was one of those buildings where there was like a top floor that we were on, and I swear to God, we were on the fifth floor, and I think floors 1, 2, 3, 4. I've no idea who ever went there.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like empty floors, and I think it's demolished now. So I think that was probably it. We were sort of hanging on with our fingernails there, and the room resembled like an airport lounge. It was like a long, thin room, and it had these two studios with. I'm very impressed with the quality of this studio you've got here.
Coach University spares
no expenses
so
spared,
expensive,
folks. Yeah,
but I will tell you that. So I'm a PhD student, and I joined. My first semester was last semester, so fall 2019, and I was really keen to start. I was kind of overwhelmed, so I'm like, can I start in about 3-4 weeks after the rest of the group starts? Because I'm just late registrant and stuff like this. I don't have a card yet. And they said, yeah, no problem. So then I get ready to go, and they say literally 2 days before, oh wait, we can't broadcast for the foreseeable future because the university has not paid the bill for,
Okay.
I guess, the hosting or the
All right.
streaming service.
fair enough.
And there seems to be perhaps some other long-standing unresolved issues about music, intellectual property licenses, and the kind of things that I assume almost every university radio show in the world violates. I mean, I certainly don't violate. I personally contacted every artist um, that I've ever played.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for about 4 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks, they were not broadcasting, and it was very much up in the air. Like they had, and I had actually never seen in the 6 months prior to that, when I had come here for work and stuff, I had never seen anybody broadcasting. So I actually had the suspicion, and no one was sending emails at that time, like that this just was an abandoned room. That maybe I could just get the key. That's like all I need.
Abandoned room, I like that.
Like right in the middle of where everybody's eating, and
Yeah.
so just really kind of obviously
It's like Scooby Doo.
not being, it could have been haunted. Maybe there was a reason.
It wasn't for you meddling kids.
But eventually I got that resolved. The university said, well, we still don't have an answer, but you guys should go ahead and just keep doing just keep doing what you're doing. And we've had no problem since. But
Mashallah.
yeah,
Keep it there. But yeah, I like that idea of an abandoned studio. There was one of those. Used to be a very similar room to this in Canyon in Levant, and it was just the same. It was like a fish tank in the middle of the Levant, and they say, oh, it's the radio station, and there was never anybody. There used to be somebody in it.
in the mall.
Yeah, somebody was there. And then after a while, they just stopped being there, and I just thought, I just wonder what they do with this thing now. And I think they used to have a radio playing in the mall.
And that would have been amazing.
Yeah.
Oh man, I would have loved to have been. Could you think of how much attention you would get from? So this mall is kind of, it's an upscale mall.
It is.
It's not the most
Top
upscale
end.
anymore. Two I think have surpassed it. But
yeah, the more upscale.
yeah, but the location of it. What's funny is that it's right next to two other malls, like literally one
Yeah.
after the other, and
Yeah.
they're completely different, like kind of working class, middle class, and then upper class.
Right.
And it's amazing how that works so neatly, because all three are doing fine and surviving.
Well, I think
And
it's that principle with anything like that. You know, you always think, well, if you've got one mall and then let's say 1,000 people go to that mall, and then you open another one, that means that 500 people go to each mall. But it doesn't really work like that, because then you get more people going because of that mall, and more people going because of the other mall. But yeah, 3 malls together.
Yeah, it's like a black hole. I think it just sucks in most of the shoppers. But I also that particular mall earns its name Canyon,
Yeah.
because it's actually, and I've never seen a mall like this. It's two-sided,
Yeah.
open to the air, and I swear to God, when there's a storm, it's almost
You feel it.
unshoppable. They
You
had to put
feel
up
it.
the glass because the wind. I remember before they put the glass up.
Yeah, when a glass event.
Yeah, the wind would just literally rip stuff out of your hands. It would be so strong, and I loved it. I said, that's clearly, like a lot of buildings. I'm sure, like somebody said, I got a great idea for a building.
Well,
Someone's gonna make it for me.
Normally, you know, with malls, when you've seen one, you've seen them all. Mall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. But yeah, I don't know how they actually put that glass up in that wind. I mean, that's an art in itself. I think they probably just have it. It's kind of there, isn't it? And they it's like big glass curtains. They just sort of bring
slides
it
in and
across
out.
Yeah. But it's a technical job. I think you've got to train for it.
Well, it's funny that they didn't plan for that in the beginning. I think they really just thought it's going to be this pleasant place, and there's never going to be that much wind. That's just not how physics works.
Yeah. But it's exciting going there, like you say, because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. But we were all right. So we were talking about the show, and then we got
We got sidetracked by malls and wind.
Well, they're exciting.
Exactly.
So you're now in Topane.
I am, yes.
So Topane is down on the water, kind of an old neighborhood just down from Istiklal. So not too difficult to get to, I imagine. Then
no, it's quite near the metro. It's quite near Shishani, quite near the tram. So you've got an option of different stations, which is always good. It's kind of in a little courtyard, which is nice, and it's its own building, so you're not having to go through, sort of dusty corridors and down steps and things like that. You walk in and it's like studio, technical bit, toilet, kitchen, upstairs office. That's it, job done.
Have you been in the? I don't even know what you call it, but I think you'll know which one I'm talking about. It's near to Eminunu. And it's like the old Rampa, the old bazaar for all musical stuff. And there's still like just tons and tons of studios in there, all pretty small, but all very much the heart of the old music industry. And still,
you know what? I went there last August. Funny you should say it, because I was looking for some. I think I told you I collect records. More of that later, but they've got these music shops in there,
Hmm.
and have you been there?
Yeah, I recorded something for. I've actually been there twice. I forget why. I think I bought some the first time, but the second time, I was recording some audio, and I didn't. It's hard to imagine that place is still open because it just
I
seems
loved
like
it.
there's no pedestrian traffic in a place like that.
It's dystopian.
Yeah,
I took some nice sort of eerie photos there of like single people standing in squares and things
yeah,
like that. I mean, brilliant sort of almost sort of cubist looking
yeah,
structures and things. But there's nobody there. There was like one guy carrying tea, and these, like you say, the remnants of what's there are these shops, and they're selling CDs still and stuff like that.
yeah.
But it's these sort of,
Classics.
I mean, it's like the only place that you can get certain artists, and but there's nobody there, like you say. There's just like somebody looking very sad playing Barris Mancho tunes, and probably
Mhm.
sat with a guitar, and a guy carrying tea to him. And that's it. That's all that worked there. And then people like me going around taking sort of strange dystopian photos.
Yeah, making them suddenly self-conscious about about their
Yeah,
situation.
it was one of my favourite places. I do like that sort of. I think you call it urban decay or sort of semi. Not it's not dereliction, but I like that desertedness about
Yeah, yeah.
somewhere. That kind of. It's been somewhere, and obviously it's sort of demised a bit, but it's still going. And I mean, one day I suppose somebody will realise that nobody's going there anymore, and it'll probably close. But it's a huge complex.
Yeah, it's massive, and you could think like there was a time where maybe 80% of all music in Turkey was coming out of that building.
Right.
It's that large, and
It's like the Brill building of Istanbul, or the I don't know the that Denmark Street of Istanbul. You know, the one in London where all the music publishers are.
oh,
There's
I
a
need to go to
it's
London
still
more
there. I
often.
mean, it's kind of yeah. I mean, people just send emails now. They just don't go in shops like that anymore.
But it's like there is a cottage industry of I think classical
Uh
artists,
huh.
and so they're still doing business over there. There's
Right.
still a lot of like I think there's a lot of very powerful people in the music industry in Turkey who still they go there because there's a history there, and there's certain people, there's old timers, and I
Mm.
think Turkey is a place where not just do you kind of respect, those older than you,
Mm-hmm.
if in terms of like face to face or something, but you actually do take the time. Like, now I have no reason to go record in this particular man's studio. I have better studios, but because it's this man,
Right.
I will go and record in his studio something. I think a lot of that still goes on because when I've been there, it's been related to that. People are like, "Oh, that's a famous singer. That's a famous not sitar, but what's
Oh, the
saz player."
Saz players.
They're coming in to record, and they're like, they're geek. They're genuinely like, "Oh, wow, that's that person." So it still has its place. It's just, yeah, like you said, there's gonna be a day where someone finally turns the lights out one night, and they just never come back on the next day.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's not soon because it is. I mean, places like that need a sort of a characteristic sort of place. And the thing I was going to say about that whole, and this is something about Istanbul in general that if you don't live here, that you probably didn't realise about Istanbul, is that there's all those places in town where there's like an area that sells, for example, tailors' dummies, and an area that sells workman's clothes, and an area that sells signs, and an area that sells electric lights. It's like no other city I've been to.
Well, so yeah, I've seen that in the Arab countries, and I
Okay,
believe that
yeah,
that's actually
it
historically.
is. Yeah, I mean, it's dating back, I'm sure.
Well, it's
To
not just for this region, but I
mm,
think there was a time these were guilds. This is
mm,
clearly some type of guild or some
right.
type of uh, what would you call it? Not a conspiracy or cabal, but like there's just it's a group. They dominate this
Uh huh.
import trade. So when you go into a place like this where there might be 80, not 80, maybe in the old days they were that big. The ones I've been to are like 40 or 50 shops, all mostly selling the same thing. And if you go into one and you ask for something, they don't got it. You don't go to the other store. They go to the other store to get it and bring it to you. You're
Right.
still going to buy it from them. And there's clearly some type of sharing, something else is going on.
Okay.
And yeah, it's amazing to think that if I want to go buy books,
Mm.
well, in the old days, like that's the book bazaar. You go there. That's the
Yeah,
only
that's
place.
it.
That's the only place you're going to get
That's
it
where you're
until
gonna go.
recently. And I think, I guess you would think like that should improve the selection because that type of support structure can sustain more niche offerings. But then I don't really know because you go into them and they're mostly selling, varieties of the same thing. I would, I'm not an economist, so I don't know what these really historically have offered to justify their continued existence. But
I
they're
guess.
interesting.
I mean, I guess it's knowing that. I mean, for example, Eminonu cameras,
Yeah,
the music
yeah,
thing we
near
talked about.
Circuit.
But I mean, the weirdest one was the Taylor's Dummies. I've got to tell you,
Yeah. Well, that's
that
just a
was
weird.
just the bizarrest, and it's like street after street of just weird looking forlorn dummies with the legs hanging out of windows and stuff like that. It's just incredible.
Well, yeah. Have you noticed the mannequins in Turkey?
Yeah,
They're weird, right? And the faces, it's like a puppet's dummy. Uh,
yeah. They've not. Yeah, some of them haven't really got faces, have they? They're sort of.
well, the ones without faces, I think that's all right.
Yeah,
But
but the
there was
ones
one where
with
they paint
faces.
them up and they've
Oh,
got
brother.
makeup, and the
Oof.
children mannequins always look the creepiest to me.
That's
And
yeah,
it's
with
always stood out
makeup.
to me about Turkey is how the mannequins are depicted, particularly for children. I just haven't seen that elsewhere.
Yeah, that's. I know what you mean. That's pretty scary. Yeah, it's again, it's sort of Scooby Doo territory. That, but no, I mean, I think the whole thing about having the things together is that you're looking for, I don't know, traffic cones. Let's go to the traffic cone
Yeah.
neighborhood, and
So there's definitely confidence. You know you're
yeah,
gonna get it.
exactly. And if you want to go to a mall, you just go to Levant.
And so now, where do you get the music? When you go looking for music, where do you go?
Where do I go? Well, that's part of the adventure of Istanbul because when I do go, I think the main part really, one of my favourite shops is in Cihangir, and that's a place called Deform. But it's kind of, there's a whole sort of community of record shops in Turkey that all the plakchas know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that. They sort of do. There's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of people sort of bitch about people and stuff like that. But then they all sort of come together. And I think there's a big event normally in September where they go to Karakoy. And there's a school there just up towards Modder where all the plakchas will sell their wares and people go along and, you get something on vinyl. So there's that sort of camaraderie. But I do like surprises. I like to go to some of the Sahaf shops.
Okay.
A couple of those in Beşiktaş. There's certainly some near the British consulate in Beyoğlu.
Beyoğlu, yeah.
I can't remember the name of it. I think it's Aslihan Passager. There's books, and you'll go in, and there'll be some like a box of records, and they'll get that out, and you sit and drink your tea and sort of flip through these boxes, and I can spend many hours in those sort of shops.
Are they getting new content? How are
No.
they replaying? No, yeah, it's just like when you go back the second time, are you seeing something you didn't see last time?
Occasionally, yeah, I leave it. It's like ploughing a field. If you leave it to
That's a
fallow
apt analogy.
if you leave it to fallow for a good sort of 6 months to a year, you might find new content.
Uh-huh.
But it's normally, I mean, what happens is, this is quite interesting that you'll see something in one plakcha in one record shop, and they sort of exchange stock. So you'll go somewhere else and you'll think, well, that's rare. But I saw that in such and such a shop. But then you go back to that shop, that won't be there anymore. So you know that's kind of
That's
gone.
a bit of deception.
Yeah. And then there was one time that I got a record. It was a British record. It was on Penny Farthing Records, which was it was known to be a good label, for sort of progressive.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Rock and all that, early 70s. Wasn't mega expensive, but it was. I think the band was called either the song was called Octopus or the band was called Octopus. And when I looked at the entry on Discogs for this record that I got from this shop, the actual picture on Discogs was the record I bought. So it had sort of little blemishes on the label, and it was the same one on Discogs.
Oh, it's the same picture.
So I actually got the Discogs copy. That was a feat.
Well,
and a
that
half.
adds a bit of value to it, right?
Isn't it? Yeah, it's straight. I mean, that makes you feel powerful enough. I've got the one that's on Discogs, but there it is. I mean, somebody had written, I don't know, Mehmet in a little corner or something like that, and it was the very one.
That's awesome.
That was pretty awesome.
Well, I mean, and that's signatures always add a little value. That's why we get celebrities and baseball players and stuff to do that type of thing. Did you guys do you have do footballers sign? Do you have cards for footballers? Like, is
Yeah,
that a very American thing?
I mean, when I was a kid, I'm not really into football massively, but I did. You know, when I was about 10 years old, we had these albums. I think they're called Figure in Panini, and I think they still have them now. And you would get these packets of like 6 stickers, and they got the badges of the football team, and then they got the pictures of the team
Hmm.
right of the day. So they'd have the goalkeeper, and there'd be a team picture. And the idea with those is you would swap them.
Yeah.
I don't know about people signing them. I suppose you could get them to sign them. I
That was
guess.
it's very much the baseball. Baseball cards used to come in like I guess tobacco packages. I think originally, and
Yeah,
then
that's
gum
right.
packages and
That's
stuff.
yeah. There was. I mean, back. I mean, this is before I was born, but certainly my sort of granddad's era, they would have what they call cigarette cards,
Mm.
and that was it was a similar thing. They'd have a series, and those now, if you can get a full set, I mean, obviously they're sort of 50, 60, 70 years old. Some of these. But they would have themes, so there'd be a I don't know country theme or a wildlife theme, and if you can find the whole set, they can go for quite a bit of money.
Yeah. Well, that's
But
interesting. I didn't see. I think in the U.S. they hooked on to baseball, and then
mm,
they just ran with it, and then they just came up with other sports. I don't know of any themed packs surviving out of that, but
yeah, I
yeah.
mean it's I'm going back to signatures, and you just reminded me of something. There was I used to when I was about 14. We used to go to a market stall, and I just remember this sort of epiphany in my life where I'd learned about second-hand record shops
How old were
because
you?
I was about 14.
14,
Yeah,
and so yeah, okay, so yeah, walk us through what was the epiphany? What came to you at that age? Because it's a bit early, I would think, for
yeah.
secondhand shops.
Well, I mean, most people my age. I mean, I was growing up in the '80s, and the bands around like Depeche Mode and Wham and all that stuff
It's two very similar
wasn't
acts.
doing a lot for me, to be quite honest. And I got into the Beatles as a lot of people
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Not as many did then as do now. I mean, now they've kind of had this
Well, because they were still
revival.
active at that time. They were still like the
Well, if
people knew them as
three of
other
them were
things.
still alive, that was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, John had been shot, and there was this big publicity about that. But this is kind of late, mid to late '80s.
Hmm.
So there was this. Yeah, there'd not been the anthology, and
Hmm.
it was. I guess it was kind of unusual for somebody who was sort of 13, 14 to be into the Beatles at that point. Because it was, oh, yeah, the Beatles, old fashioned or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember even like with George Harrison and John Lennon, because what do you do when you bought all the Beatles albums? You think, well, I'll buy the ex Beatles albums.
Yeah.
You got like you could walk into any shop and you could find like Tug of War or Pipes of Peace by Paul McCartney. I mean, I lived in a small town, and you could buy some of the more recent stuff quite easily. But then, for example, you could not buy a George Harrison album. You couldn't get it. You just they were deleted even by 1987. He bought one out.
Interesting.
He bought one out in 1987, but anything he bought out in the 70s, you could not find it.
Was he just not? He just was not a major solo act.
No, I mean he had a big sort of
He got into the sitar. He spent a lot of time
right.
doing other
I mean
types
he
of
did
music.
stuff with Ravi Shankar and stuff like that. But then there was there were a couple of big albums like All Things Must Pass, Living the
Hmm.
Material World, Dark Horse, Extra Texture, and it only kind of got more and more obscure. But then you just couldn't find these anywhere. I remember my dad found me one of those old cassettes where there were like 2 albums on one cassette, and it was like £1.99, and I think the car stereo chewed it up, so that was that.
Yeah.
So that any kind of link to George Harrison, or so I thought, was gone, and then found this second-hand shop. It was in Mansfield, and it was like I remember the smell. And I think all second-hand bookshops smell pretty much the
Yeah.
same as well.
Yeah.
It's like a tobacco-y smell. People generally smoked in there, and the sort of paper on the vinyl and stuff. And that excites me. And I just remember actually just looking through and finding. I mean, we were talking about this before we came on air, but the thrill of finding a George Harrison album in amongst all that was on vinyl. I mean, it was a sort of repress, but it was it was there. It was like wow. somebody if I get this. This is good. And
Well, yeah, because most people,
yeah.
in your peerage, wouldn't have known where to get it, even if they had wanted to get it.
Well, exactly, and it wasn't mega expensive because these albums weren't rare.
That's the beauty of this. Yeah, the second hand.
They were like in those days about £3.99, which sounds a lot of money now, but it wasn't really a king's ransom. But I remember this market guy. It was about Christmas time, and he'd got a copy of Living in the Material World by George Harrison. It's got like a hand on the front of it with some coins in it. And I just remember him saying, "Oh, I've got this coming this week." And wow, there it was. And and I just remember him opening it up, and somebody had written on the inner sleeve, George Harrison. He went, "Signed." Like, yeah, right. Really, I wasn't that gullible, but it was just the way he did it. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He knew you were hooked. But that would be. I imagine if you are running a shop like that, you kind of tell. Yeah, when someone suddenly realizes what's inside that shop, and that must be a really treat for them too. Like, I mean,
it's like a Pandora's box. I mean, I can't walk past any vinyl shops. If I ever see anywhere I go, I will have to take a detour. Last time I went to England, my parents, God bless them, picked me up from the airport, and we went by a place called Langley Mill. And it's a little mining village in Nottinghamshire. You wouldn't think there would be a vinyl shop there, but I think it's because the rent's pretty cheap.
I was going to say you might now think that it's more likely. I mean, because it's kind of probably an older community,
right?
Who might appreciate
it. Makes
Yeah,
sense, and it's around Nottinghamshire. It's pretty well known. So we stopped there, and my mum and dad, they're sort of getting on a bit now, but they sort of, we'll wait for you a little bit. And I was like, I'm going to be ages in here. Just do something. Go and, I don't know, buy some cakes or something like that. But they came back after about an hour. You're still looking round? I was like, yeah. Drive around the block a few times. And in the end, I thought, I've got to go now. I've got to go and toe the line. But yeah, you can spend a whole day in those places.
So that's a pretty good shop then.
It was pretty good. And what I liked about this particular shop, is this guy, I mean, he's obviously thought it through. You'll get like the Beatles, for example, or the Beach Boys, or the Pink Floyd, or whatever, and sort of the popular groups like that. He's got, instead of there just being like, the Beatles, and then like, let's say Rubber Soul, Revolver, a couple of White albums, that's it. He's got like 20 White albums together, like different pressings, 20 songs and Peppers together, and they'll all be like, one will be from the 1970s, one will be from the original period, and they'll vary in price according to the cover and the condition of the label, whether they've actually got a record inside them. And
that's a surprise, right? When you get home and
there's this thing in England as well. I don't know if you have it in the States. The charity shop culture.
It's there, yeah. It's I wouldn't say it's super common. It's definitely for a different social class. Yeah. So that, you have this kind of, like in New York and stuff, you'll have comfortably wealthy people who go into as a hobby, as an aesthetic, as something that they really really like, and then at the same time, for the rest of the country, typically it's people who need that price discount, and so they go into the charity shops and stuff, thrift stores.
With this, I mean, it is that, but what's happened now is there's been this sort of gentrification of thrift stores.
Yeah,
that you've got places like Oxfam that have located. I mean, for example, there was one. I used to live in Cambridge many years ago, and there was one that was there, and you've got people going for May balls and stuff like that. So they would take in these designer ball gowns and things like that. So they would charge.
Yeah. So that was actually something. Yeah, one of the radio shows I listened to. That was coming out of London. And they were talking about, like, there's a bit of a competition sometimes. You want to take your, something you don't want anymore, but you think it's good. You take it down to one of these shops, and you kind of want to see if it made the window. And I think that's not in the U.S. because thrift stores, like, Americans don't normally have storefronts.
No.
So much because we drive everywhere. So only in certain cities could you have the concept of, like, that type of promotion, that type of accomplishment. But I did hear about that, and that's neat that it's almost like gamifying, using this concept of like that's the reward for you if you donated well, uh, you got like,
Donate well,
yeah,
folks.
yeah,
Yeah.
you got to be in the window that you won that week or that something like that.
Well, what these shops do, I mean, they're not necessarily all that top end, but what happens is one of two things. Um, People will take in, let's say, for example, a quadraphonic version of Dark Side of the Moon,
Hmm.
which is quite rare. I mean, again, it's not extremely rare, but it's something that would go for quite a price. But somebody might take one into, let's say, Dr. Bernardo's or something like that, and you'll get somebody there who's this volunteer, probably, somebody who's retired, absolutely no clue about
Yeah,
music. No, like, oh, it's a record. We don't play records anymore. And they put a sticker on it, £2.99. You know, and somebody's got a bargain. The opposite of that is now what's happened is there's been this sort of vinyl revolution,
yeah,
sort
yeah,
of through the 2010s. People, it's kind of been through the media. It's kind of got popular again, and that obviously commands prices. And then people look at Discogs and other things like that, which is a bit of a guide for a price. But somebody can stick on a record that's like, I don't know, the greatest hits of Steel Eye Span or something like that, which is just I mean, you probably pay £10 for it tops if it was in decent condition, and that might be too expensive. They're not rare records, but then they'll this particular one might have somebody's address in biro on the back and like paint on it or something like
hmm,
that. But then because it's a record, and it's on Discogs at £80, so let's
yeah,
put £85 on it. I mean, nobody would be. You would think daft enough to buy that, but then people can look at it and think, oh, that's really rare. It's a record. I'll buy. I mean,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
exaggerating a little bit, but that's what tends to happen.
yeah. I mean, I mean, I think when people were discovering vinyl,
Mm.
rediscovering vinyl,
Mm.
who never grew up with it, like I never grew up with it. I've never played one. I don't think.
Mm.
There was this idea that it's a higher quality sound because it's kind of it's analog. So compared to
Yeah.
digital, like but that's only kind of at certain frequencies do you get that, and lower
Yeah.
frequencies you don't. So, if I got like, I'm a fan of hip hop among other things, and so if I got a vinyl press of Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, I don't think it's gonna just be the it's just not gonna I'm not gonna get the best audio quality at the
Snoop
end.
Dogg in mono, yeah.
And
I think what I would say is for the people that I'm into, I think we were saying before the show, I tend to be into sort of more older stuff. Sort of, occasionally I get dragged kicking and screaming into the 1980s, but that's about as much as I go, really.
oh man, the '80s are all the rage now.
Right. But I'm talking about early 80s, like sort of post-punk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sort of thing. Those records, I mean, if you got something like Rolling Stones' Beggar's Banquet, for example, that's a classic album.
Hmm.
And to me, that album was made to be played on vinyl, and that takes into account all the sort of, because if you've got a recording, you put it onto vinyl, it takes into account all the sort of background noise that they didn't want to get on that recording.
Hmm.
What you had when you got the advent of CDs was that people slapped those recordings onto this thing and said, well, it's clean, and did they have that in
Yeah.
America? They said you can spread jam on them and they'll be
Ah.
all right. Yeah. There's a YouTube video somewhere of somebody spreading jam on a CD and seeing what happens. You can't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that it.
Yeah, I mean,
that
it was, but that was how they were marketed. But they were sold in this sort of plastic box, and they were just plastic, really. The sound was so clean that's not rock and roll. You know what I mean?
Well, and that goes back to it's about the frequency. So
Right.
I remember because I had cassettes,
Mhm.
and I remember when CDs took over. I was in high
Mm.
school and middle school when it really started to blow up, and it kind of came up with, it was like this perfect thing. Hip hop had been around for a while, but I think was still largely kind of better live. So what CD allows you to do is it really picks up those lower frequencies, the bass. I mean,
Mm.
bass became so essential
Oh,
to these
yeah.
new genres.
Oh, it did.
And
Yeah.
CDs did that, where vinyl could not do that
Right.
because you'd rattle the whole thing off the thing. So, it
Yeah.
was that. I think that's why, particularly like what I was my preference was the West Coast, kind of a G funk.
Mhm.
This deep, heavy bass, and it came up with technology at the right time. If it had come up 10 years before, it wasn't going to be. And you listen to funk, which obviously directly inspired it.
Hmm.
And funk is, it's it's got its bass, of course, but nothing on that level. Like there were so many other things. Funk had horns and a million other things. Um, and when it got into to hip hop, they really, they were going for something else, and they just kind of took from it that rhythm section, and then just kicked it up really high. And again, without the CDs, they couldn't have done it in the same way.
See, I mean that again. That's for that genre.
Yeah.
The CD is probably the better medium.
Yeah, but but for rock,
Yeah.
for certain, yeah. You even I remember, yeah, as you said, we weren't using such great analogies like spread and jam on it, but we did, like, there was this belief that, oh, look, listen to how clean that is. Like, it's just so crisp. You can tell the difference that it's not a CD.
I think that in that era, what I do remember is these people sort of selling their vinyl. I knew people, sort of mature people, who were sort of my age now, mid 40s,
Mhm.
sort of selling vinyl they bought in the 70s. For in those days, I mean, this was next to nothing.
Yeah.
I wish I could go back and buy some of them now, but they just weren't because it was like, this is going to dominate, this is going to take over, and it was a piece of plastic.
But did you ever see those machines they sold for home that would convert your vinyl to CD for you?
I'm
I-
aware of them, but yeah,
I used to say that was a little like cottage industry for a little while. That kind of had its day, but then, like, going back to the point, if you really kept your vinyls, if you treasured your vinyls, presumably you could play them. So you weren't really getting a whole lot out of converting them to CD.
exactly.
So
I mean,
you don't see them anymore.
There's a lot of things now. I mean, for example, I talked about the Beatles. There's a Japanese box set of the Beatles that came out, I think it was in the early 80s. And they were directly transcribed from the original tapes. And they say it's the closest you can ever get to those tapes.
Hmm.
This is better than any Beatles anthology. It's better than anything else that came out before or after it. And that box set now is really highly sought after, but it's on vinyl. You don't get it on CD. It's a strange thing, but I think, going back to what I was saying, that those records were made for vinyl, and they sort of account for all the sort of pops and clicks and sniffs and burps and coughs and everything like that.
Yeah, and so we are unfortunate. Well, somewhat hypocritically on my side, we are a web radio.
We
show.
are.
So we are
Yes.
digitizing. So all the richness of our voices is kind of
Yes.
being just dumbed down for mass consumption, and we're gonna play some music at
We
some
are.
point.
Yeah.
We're 40 minutes in. We're gonna play some songs you've selected,
Uh-huh.
and unfortunately these are also digitized. So
Right.
now your radio show is not digitized, right? Is it?
It's semi-digitized. It's
Okay.
I try and make it as undigitized as I can, but I mean, just for convenience, I've got one record deck there. I've got two, but one hasn't got a styly in it.
That's important.
Yeah,
Important, is it?
Styly plural, stylus. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I would love to. But I would love two decks. That would be great. What I normally do is, if I'm playing back to back, I'll use little snippets of music. We'll talk about this a little bit later, maybe, that library music, just to adds a bit of texture, and it gives me time, sometimes not enough time, but just to cue something up.
Yeah.
Which can be difficult
But
sometimes.
what I mean is you broadcast, right? So Açık Radio is actually, it's that old fashioned radio where the word derived its meaning from.
It's on FM.
Yeah.
94.9.
94.9.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Is that how you have to say it? Is that part of your agreement with the show?
No, it's. I mean, we sort of. They encourage us to sort of say you're listening to Ashit Radio 94.9 or whatever. But
Well, they should. That's what you're supposed to do.
That's what. Yeah, I mean, that's because you could be. I mean, most consumers of that, especially that listen on old radio, as it were. I mean, probably people in cars that are sort of making these sort of 20-minute journeys from the supermarket back home, and it's Saturday tea time. So they probably never hear a whole show.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably think, "Who is this bloke? I don't know."
Yeah, and what is
What's he
this channel?
going
What
on
is this
about?
channel that I'm listening to?
Yeah, so I mean, I should probably do that more. There, yeah.
Well, we always had to do it at Boise, but at Coach, they're much more relaxed. I never had to sign a contract. I never had to sign an agreement saying how many times I was going to say it.
Well, Ashik is, I mean, its name sort of denotes it's open radio, so that they try and sort of capture every sound in the universe. And I think I was telling you the story the other day that we were listening to it in our car one night. We were driving home, and it was like 10 o'clock at night. And sort of driving down Butte Dairy Jadasset, and I'd have thought that there was a problem with the fan belt in the car. Like there was this sort of, I mean, and it was a sort of new car, and it was like, and we, very nervous about,
very concerned, yeah, about your
come
safety.
flying out of the bonnet or something like that. And we got to where we live, and we turned the radio off, turned the car off, and the radio was still on, and we could hear this coming out. It was like almost like white noise, but with this, I don't know, distortion, feedback, whatever it was. And we thought, and this was Ashik Radio. Thought, have they been hauled off air or something like that? There were,
Because you never really know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is there a problem? Is there a problem with the transmitter? And we phoned Ashik Radio, where I'm a broadcaster, and they said, "Oh no, it's a show." There you are. So it was.
Well, yeah, I just wonder how many other listeners who didn't have readily the phone number for for Achik Radio Management, what they must have thought.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that's the name of the beast, really. If they have these very specific shows, and I guess if you're into, I don't know what that genre's called. Is it sort of generic feedback or white noise? I mean, if you're into that, then that's the show for you, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there was another program. I can't remember the name of the jazz musician even, but the whole show had been going for about 3 years, and all they played was this one jazz musician in New York. That was it.
Just one guy.
Just one guy.
That's amazing.
That's pretty good. There was another one that was all Beatles. It was all the Beatles.
That's I've tried to do a single 2-hour show around an artist, and I found that almost like just impossible to wrap my head around.
Difficult, isn't it? I mean, where do you end?
Yeah, well,
or where do you begin?
I mean, is it the same set? I mean, obviously with the Beatles or any other group that's got like 6 or 7 albums, you could probably cut them up a few times. You could play them straight through and still manage to get 3 or 4 shows. But after that, are you just like changing different mixes? I mean, that's a challenge, right?
It's going inside the music. There's a lot of, with the Beatles, you can probably do it because there's a lot of stories about those albums. I suppose it's how much you're into. At the end of the day, it's how much you're into that person.
Yeah,
and if there's, I guess, the other thing is if there's enough interest in that. That's the other equation. There was another guy I knew there, and still broadcasting on there, who had a free jazz show. Are you familiar with free jazz?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, and some of that's pretty off the wall. And at the time, he was coming to me for English classes, and he gave me a CD of his sort of, would you call it a band?
I don't know. Yeah, in free jazz, what do you get?
Musicians or whatever.
Coincidental acquaintances.
Yeah, and it got like 4 tracks on it, and it was like a CD. So he said, "Look, next lesson, come and let's talk about this CD." I thought, "Oh, that's great. Okay."
All right.
So I went home, and I put it on. And in those days, I hadn't got a proper CD player. I was playing it through the TV speakers.
Okay.
They are pretty decent. I put it in, and so it was a very communal experience with my wife there. And put it on, and it was 20 minutes of something like that. And I said, "Well, what did you get out of it?" And well, I felt like I was running through wet nettles in a shell suit. Yeah, how about you? Whatever. And then the next week he said, "Well, go and listen to track 2." And it was, I don't think it even got a name. I think it was just like a swirl or something, like that's free jazz, folks. And put that on. And there was something on that track that was absolutely, it was like a dog whistle or something like that. But all of a sudden it's like that. I could hear there was something there.
Yeah.
The cat freaked out. The cat went absolutely mental. And I had to stop it. It was just like the
That's
fur
incredible.
on the back of its
dangerous.
neck was gone up, and like everything. Like I'd have said, just get it off. Just
Yeah.
so, and I went back to him the following day. I said, "So, what did you think of track 2?" I said, "Well, with a certain amount of regret, the cat hated it, so I
Yeah.
had to take it out. I couldn't listen to it."
we loved it, but
Yeah, right.
it
I,
was a danger to the animals around us.
I've still got that CD somewhere, so I still need to sort of
To
continue
finish it,
listening.
yeah.
Yeah, but just make sure Pele's not around, otherwise he's going to suffer.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, fortunately I hope I don't play anything. I got a guy, Lance. He's gone on the show twice, and he's
Okay.
very much into obscure songs, and I can't remember the name of the group, but there was a group that he turned me on to that apparently was Kurt Cobain had once said that like it was his favorite group.
Oh,
These four
yeah.
daughters whose father
Oh,
forced them to play.
from the what do you call it? The Shags.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what it was. Yeah,
They
yeah,
were
yeah.
from I don't know, somewhere
It's
in,
somewhere Western United States.
and yeah, Frank Zappa championed them at the
Yeah,
time.
that's the other thing. Yeah, and Lance is a big fan of
But
Frank Zappa.
no, they're incredible. Have you ever heard them?
I've heard 5 or 6, and I have to say that my pal Foot is a fascinating listen, and I actually like that track.
What's the one about parents? My parents are thy friends, or something like that.
So that's a band that
Yeah.
could be the core component of an entire dedicated episode. And I've dabbled with the idea because I don't want to be too pretentious because I only like one or two tracks. Can I enjoy the rest? Is just fascinating to listen to. But I can't say like this is something I'm musically
Well,
satisfied
you
with.
could start there and sort of look for people who've covered the Shags. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a bit of a
yeah, that could be another thing.
conundrum, isn't it? Not sure many people have, but yeah, that's an album.
It's
for
got to be
2/3.
hard. It's got to be
Yeah.
incredibly difficult to play them. I mean, to cover them.
Well, I mean, what happened? This dad forcing them thing. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a contention. There's whole website forums about this. They didn't actually know what they were doing, and that the result was that you've got 3 people playing on there who were about as musical as a jar of marmalade.
Well,
That's the one thing.
that is a story that they were completely untrained.
But then when you listen to it, it's like Captain Beefheart and his magic band. When you first hear Trapmass Replica, it's just and you think, well, where is any kind of semblance of anything coming out of that? But then the more you listen to it, it's addictive.
Yeah.
It's certainly that happened with the Shags, but yeah, it's a challenging listen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I said,
Yeah.
to play it, I remember. Did you see the movie? With Shay. What's the guy? Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant and
golly.
Meryl Streep.
Golly.
Meryl Streep was this famous American heiress, or billionaires, who wanted to be an opera singer,
Okay.
and so she had teachers, and she was awful and tone deaf, and no
Right.
one told her.
Mm-hmm.
So she lived this entire. So, but as it became this play, and they made a film out of. I think that it was really quite good,
Mm.
and so the thing was, for Meryl Streep, it was incredibly difficult to sing badly, to sing that badly, and because if you're trained to sing at all, you can't make those mistakes naturally. You have to plan every single mistake and the series and sequence, and so for a musician to cover the Shags would be,
Yeah.
I would think, an incredible challenge.
Yeah, I mean that's probably it. I mean it's the same with Beefheart. You couldn't possibly dissect.
Yeah.
I think that's the word. You'd have to dissect what they'd done. But I mean it's just. I mean when you just I don't know. Go and listen to it.
I was going to say, we talked about it so much, I don't actually have the Shags ready for
I know,
tonight.
I wish I'd sent you them now. What have I sent? Let's have a look.
Yeah, let's have a look. So we've got and I never sometimes with these I don't know which one's the track title and which one's the band, but we got Big in Japan, Suicide a Go Go,
Oh,
which is
Suicide
pretty peppy.
That's pretty peppy, yeah.
Then we had Brazil. We had Freestyle with John Hawkins.
Oh yeah.
We got Keith Manfield's Teenage Chase, which you said was library music.
Yeah, it's library.
And then was it Le? My French is awful. This
It's a Brazilian thing actually. It's
Oh, it's
some
Portuguese?
French
Oh.
Yeah, but it's not. No, it's French guys that were recording in Brazil or Brazilian guys in France.
Mm.
One or the other. But yeah, it's remind me of the title again. It's
Les Marqués is it Tenir?
Les Masques. Yeah, Les
Yeah, Les
Masques
Masques.
is the name of it. Yeah.
So we got that. And if anyone who speaks either Portuguese or French better than us, I
Kind of meet
apologize.
in the middle. I kind of enjoy it.
Wilson Pickett. He's got Hey Jude. Now, is that a
Oh.
cover of Hey Jude?
Yeah, that's the cover. There's a story there in that the reason that's such an awesome cover is it's got Dwayne Allman playing guitar on it. And it was likened, the sound of him playing guitar was likened to a Boeing 777.
Well, that's a pretty recent analogy, too, because that's
Isn't it?
that's a 20-year-old
isn't that
plane.
the old one? The
747.
707. Yeah, it was,
okay.
Yeah, this was like 1970. So
Well,
yeah,
it's probably an analogy lost on most people today. 707's a
Yeah.
classic that's kind
Right.
of been retired for 30
Yeah.
years. But explanation of listener leading into Stevie Moore.
Stevie Moore. That's that's
California Rhythm.
California Rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of wet the whistle of the audience
Just
with,
a little bit.
I mean, this was an awful lot of chatty foreplay.
I was.
Yeah. What are we going to start them off with?
I think let's start them off with Hey Jude. I think.
Yeah, I'm actually pretty geeked. I went through a Beatles phase like most people, so I'm interested to see this one.
But just listen to the guitar, folks.
Okay.
Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. Remember to let her in your heart. Then you can start to make it better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I don't.
Did you hear the 707 there?
I mean, that's. Yeah, but that was a style, I think, as well. The recording at the time, like
Yeah.
just what was it? Wall of Sound was that. I mean, when was Wilson
Well, so
Pickett?
that was
70s.
60. That was 68. Oh,
Okay, so it was
yeah.
quite soon after the
Pretty
original.
much, yeah, pretty much the same time. And Dwayne Allman was in the Allman Brothers, and he was sort of sort of popular Allman Brothers. He wasn't really in the Allman Brothers very long, and before his untimely demise, unfortunately. But I don't know, he sort of got himself a bit of a job as a session musician, and I
Yeah.
guess he liked it. I think he liked just jamming with different people, but they just, yeah, I mean, the horn section was sort of very typical of the sort of Muscle Shoals sound,
Hmm.
but that sort of I don't know, it's just
It's good.
makes it
That's
in
an
the
that's an
room.
epic that's an epic version.
It's just that just that alone just makes it, yeah, and it lends itself well, I think. But one thing with Dwayne Allman, whenever I see a picture of him, it's just something that fascinates me. He liked whiskey, you know.
He did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he liked drinks. He liked drugs. He just weren't very good for him. That was all. But he was a big fan of Green Label Jack Daniels, and I think I think now you can only get that in certain states. Is that right?
I don't know. Yeah, the label thing.
Yeah.
Even I don't really. Yeah, I don't really know the hierarchy, the tiers of labels.
Yeah, it just I don't know. It just looks so 70s when you see a picture of him. You know.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating when you see when you like kind of discover, recordings of people before they were famous.
Yeah.
And obviously like in this case, I don't think he was completely unknown maybe at this point, but he wasn't the legend that he might become, and here it's quite respectable. Like you can see like wow, yeah, that's we've seen the beginnings of what he would be,
Yeah.
and but I did a Star Wars Christmas special, a radio show,
Oh, okay.
and there was two Star Wars out. There was a Star Wars TV special, which is famously awful, and then 2 years later for The Empire Strikes Back, they came out with with the Christmas album.
Christmas, what, a Star Wars?
Yeah,
Christmas
Star Wars
album?
Christmas album. It was R2D2 and C3PO with the original, people behind the voices.
I must have this.
It's amazing. Christmas in the Stars is the name of that album, and in one of the tracks, which I think is R2D2 We Love You, sung by children, also has the first ever recording of the man who would become John Bon Jovi.
Wow.
Which is just like that's just just so and when he comes in and
Yeah.
he's on the track, you
Right.
know immediately. Okay, yeah, that's
John
Bon
right
Jovi.
there, yeah.
Yeah, it's before he even went by Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
I think whatever his real name, which is effectively Bon Jovi
John?
with another syllable
Yeah,
or something.
John, I don't know, Wiseman or something like that.
But I mean, I don't think he looks back and says like that's where it all started for me.
Well, some people just they write off their kind
Their
of
early
history.
work,
And
yeah.
You know who does that a lot, and kind of I don't know why, and that's Kraftwerk. You know Kraftwerk.
I don't know.
They did, I mean, famously did Autobahn and Trans Europe Express, and
Okay.
there was a sort of string of about, I think, 5 albums. There was Robots, there was Computer World, but there were 3 records before they bought out Autobahn that they just don't refer to them. They don't acknowledge
Yeah.
them. 2 of them have pictures of, in fact, all 3 of them have pictures of traffic cones on, which again is going back to that district in Istanbul that sells traffic cones. But yeah, they just don't refer to them.
They just disowned him.
And they're not bad records, They're all right. They're not anything to be ashamed of. Whereas with John Bon Jovi and R2D2, We Love You. I mean, nothing to be ashamed of.
I mean, John Bon Jovi doesn't need to be ashamed of anything with as much money and fame as he
Of
has,
course.
presumably. And
Got to remember your roots.
yeah, I mean, it's a fabulous album. Yeah, if you haven't listened, I played 2 hours of Star Wars Christmas music and wasn't sure I
Hang
could
on.
find it.
Let's go back. 2 hours of Star Wars Christmas music.
Yeah, it was only Star Wars Christmas music. That was that, and I filled it up. I did fill it up. I only talked a little bit about like my relationship with Star Wars and Christmas.
Is this all from the same record?
No. I had to go outside of that because that album's not 2
Yeah.
hours. That album, and not every track on that album's a winner. Some of it's
Right.
filler.
No, really.
But I think the most famous album, or famous track off that album is "What Do You Get a Wookiee for Christmas When He Already Has a Comb?" And that's
Oh,
actually been covered. I actually played a cover of that later, because that is a legendary Star Wars tune.
that's just history in the making.
Yeah, and that
You found other music that was sort of
yeah,
peripheral to Star
YouTube.
Wars, but
Yeah,
themed for Christmas.
no, no, no, no, no. It was all explicitly Star Wars. And so the YouTube is fabulous for this, and diving into some of these
Yeah.
albums. So I mean, because YouTube, like anyone
Yeah.
who's got a bit of musical ability, and just free time, a gimmick, something that they want to stand out with. There's actually some really beautiful Christmas Star Wars music that's come out, which is that was a fabulous discovery. That there's actually so there was a medley this guitarist does. He does like teach yourself guitar, and of course he needs to show off to get you to buy his his tutorials, and he actually did this Christmas music and Star Wars theme music guitar medley, which was just majestic. I mean, some of the transitions he made, it'd be like 10 seconds of that song leading into 10 seconds of another song, going back from Christmas Star, and he really, really great.
That's some talent right there.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyone wants to learn guitar and thinks that YouTube is the way to do it, that guy whose name I mentioned 2 months ago, go find that.
Star Wars guitar player
That's
session extraordinaire.
medley,
is
Star
there.
Wars medley,
Star
guitar
Wars
medley.
That's what it's
Yeah.
all about. Well, there was a really good. I mean, I remember, and I was listening to it only last night. Actually, I wish I'd sent it to you. Actually, it was a group called Miko. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't, no.
They did a Star Wars theme in 1977. It was like a disco instrumental.
I'm sure I've heard it.
But what I loved about that song, and I still love now, and I mean, I'm not a massive, I'm a bit like Freddie Mercury. George was never my scene. I don't like Star Wars. I like the first movie. I kind of got into that a lot later. But everybody had the figures, when I was a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
But this particular version of it has got a brilliant sort of, it's a Star Wars theme, but it's like, and then it sort of segs into the cantina scene.
Yeah. I've heard it. I've heard it for sure.
You know the one I mean?
Yeah, I know it.
It's not like because in the movie, I think was it John Williams that did the soundtrack? It's more sort of 20s sort of flapper jazz.
Yeah.
It just kind of gets a whole lot more soul.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could do another Star Wars theme show easily.
It sounds like you can.
And that would feature quite highly because the disco, Star Wars disco. I think there was an album actually put together of approved Star Wars disco. Because it wasn't even just approved; that was just the style of the time, man. Everyone was about disco in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess.
It was all about the disco, and people. That's the thing. Now there was a movement in the early 80s that was like burn disco, get rid of disco.
Yeah.
People were behind that. I don't really get that. I think a lot of disco. I mean, they said punk was necessary because punk kind of cleansed the palates of a lot of music. It was kind of dominated, I think, by sort of dinosaurs from the 60s, as people put it before that.
Yeah.
But disco was its own thing. I mean, if you've got a good disco record, it's pretty lush.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got Bidoo was a producer, did a lot of strings on a lot of those, Barry White, Tina Charles, those sort of records. They're pretty credible.
Yeah, the production was lush. I think there was a time because you had. I don't know because you went from like 4-person bands kind of dominating for a while the pop scene,
Right.
And then I think it came back around to like definitely more of like an orchestral component. Like there seemed to be just so much more variety of sound on albums at that for a while there.
Yeah,
and then it boiled down to synthesizers again and kind of went through this other phase.
I mean, a good synth is good as well. I mean, I'm not, some of those early synths, there was a period in the late 70s where people in the UK, we were talking about people that were sort of starting up sort of independently. And groups like the Human League, I mean, the first incarnation of the Human League, not the one that I was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar before that.
Yeah.
They were from Sheffield, so it's pretty near where I hail from. They were getting these catalogue synthesizers. The mums would have there was a catalogue called K's, and they used to have a van called a White Aravan that bought normally you do like clothes. You could get clothes from it, but around Christmas, my mum would show me this catalogue. So, what do you want for Christmas? And they'd have, I don't know, a bowling set, or they'd have I don't know, sort of tea set or something like that. Something,
Yeah,
or a
something for
chocolate
the
dispenser. That sort of cheap stuff of the day. But in the music section, I mean, I was never allowed to look in there because it was perhaps a bit pricey. But you could get the first sort of early, sort of credible synthesizers, and people, I think people bought some of the synthesizers from there, and just got into this thing of recording in the bedroom. And certainly people like Gary Newman, guy out of Ultravox, Mark Fox. Before Ultravox did Vienna, there was a guy called, I think it was Mark Fox. No, sorry, John Fox. He got 2 X's on his name. But it was all this same sort of synthesizer sound, and a lot of that sounds pretty edgy,
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, before it became
Yeah.
so well established, what you do with this
Yeah.
to create commodity music.
And we were talking. I think we were talking about this the other day as well. We met up for coffee. I mean, I think you can produce music a little bit too much. I think music needs that edge. It needs distortion. It needs something. I don't know, something that distinguishes it from. One of the problems of recording, I think, especially now, is that people have the ability, especially with digital recording, they have the ability to edit all the sort of what I call sniffs, burps, and coughs out of everything. And I think you need something sort of unique on a recording. So if there's something slightly off key, slightly out of time, that actually helps that record.
Yeah, that's also interesting that you bring that up about the overproduction, because, and maybe you correct me, but I feel like now in the last, like, say 15, 20 years, people buy the albums of producers, like on the basis it's a producer. And so you have guys like Danger Mouse who are kind of like famously minimalistic, or you have a guy like Kanye West who that's his whole aesthetic is more of everything.
Yeah.
And you either kind of turn off or not based off of how much do you want more sound and more versus something more stripped down. And I don't think people were buying the producer's work in the past.
No.
And so maybe that's why, like, this idea of the idiosyncrasies of a live recording become less idiosyncratic or less natural. They become planned. They become, pretend and acted upon when you have a producer making it, because it's not the artist in there recording and saying, no, that's maybe I did something. I made an unexpected sound at that moment, but my performance, that's the performance I want, and so I'm going to accept that was there.
I mean, there was a famous story with, Brian Eno. I mean, now producer and very sort of, he was a philosopher as well. I think he philosophizes about all sorts of things. But he used to have these cards. You can actually print them off on there's sets of them on the web, called oblique strategy cards. Have you heard of that?
Okay, I haven't, no.
What they would be if you were having some sort of creative sort of crisis or something like that.
Okay.
You would pick these cards, and it would say, turn up the volume, or it would give you something that you would do, that you would respond to that card. And one of my favourites was, honour thy error as a hidden intention. So if there's something, you're playing back something, you think, that somebody's playing off key, or somebody's not beating in, time or whatever, you think, actually, I like that they don't beat in time, or I like that it's off key. And I do like that principle, that then makes that song's thing,
That's I have to go find that, actually, because I'm actually technically a design student.
Well,
and
that
so,
would help you.
That sounds like the kind of tool that would fit into some of the theories and frameworks that we're trying to teach when we teach design to students.
It's great, just as a sort of reference to, I don't know what to do, let's pick up an oblique strategy card, and there you go.
Yeah, so what we're doing with this one class that we do, it's world building. So we give these groups of students individually like a single condition, and all right, build a world. Build the world where that's the condition. So the condition can be, I mean, some of them are a little bit less than like ultra inspired. They're like, oh, the world's really hot, the world's really cold, we all live underground. In mine, I kind of got stuck with it. I'm all right with it, but it wasn't my first choice. Was that we've all got 20% of gravity. Like I don't tell you anything else. I don't tell you anything else other than we got 20% gravity of what we have today. And so, they're supposed to build. And so it's kind of weird because at the ultimate end goal for design, when you teach design, kind of invariably comes back to designing a product, like to suit the needs of a people in that time. And
Okay.
that through that action, one, you become, you're able to challenge yourself by speculating on what would be. And so it's supposed to be, really creatively fertile. And it probably is. I think it's undermined a little bit by this idea that we're actually ultimately working towards building a product, because this is what designers as an industry have to do.
Yeah,
But
I mean, you're catering for somebody with a need.
yeah, yeah. So,
yeah,
but with music, I don't, and so that maybe that's the difference between like design and art, and that's, or at least a potential discussable difference is that
well, that's an interesting concept because a lot of music now. I mean, I'm being very sort of. I'm going to probably be quite naive about it now, but the industry now is very sort of directional. There's sort of certain very specific content, and people will be told we need X content because we're catering for this demographic, and
Yeah.
this is because if you've got a big record company and they're publishing music, and I mean that's a whole different ball game as well. But they're trying to satisfy
yeah,
a demographic basically, and it's got to have this amount of rhythm on it, and it's got to have a 4/4 song, and it's got to have a this, that, and the other. And when you go back into certainly in the 70s, a lot of the bands like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, they had a lot of very sort of creative license, which you would not get now. You just wouldn't get it. So, given a band would go in and sort of, well, that band knows what to do. That's that band's thing.
yeah,
For example, Neil Young, I was just thinking about him with the Honour Thy Error thing. One of his strategies was he would insist that the band only played through a song like once, and that would be it, because he wanted that song to sound like people were making mistakes.
mm-hmm.
And it was kind of crunchy, and like the rhythm was all over the place, and that's what he wanted. That was the sound he actually wanted, and you can imagine he'd have a hard time sort of getting away with that now.
Yeah, that's a good point because that in the world of film that recently came up because Scorsese recently kind of weighed in on his thoughts about like these giant comic book films.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
saying it's just not for me. I can appreciate the technical work that goes into them,
Sure.
but for me they're not cinema. And that's just like that just set off a somewhat of a firestorm in the industry because you couldn't say Scorsese doesn't know what he's talking about, but at the same time you got people like you got Oscar winners in those films who don't whether they fully believe their defense. They don't want to just be like, yeah, I've spent the last 2-3 years, I've made a couple $100 million off of Tripe. They got to defend it because they put their time and effort, and that's their reputation. So it got to be this big debate. But I think it might go back to something else, that this idea that those films are designed top down. They're management designed films. There's an ability to express yourself within those constraints. And I guess you could say that always is there because a director almost never gets carte blanche. They don't get money and just say, you make whatever it is you want to make. An investor's always got to say, and in music, I imagine it's the same. But for Scorsese's point, maybe it was this idea that on that spectrum, it was certainly way to the other side of it. He's not solving a need when he makes a film about the Hoffa, assassination and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Whereas whoever's making the Avengers, Disney's got a need, which is to sell more of all the other stuff, and the film is the solution to that need. And so the director ultimately is, and everyone involved with it is trying to do their best to satisfy their own ambitions within the construct of solving a need for Disney.
Yeah, I mean, I think with music, it's exactly the same. It's sort of this prescribed thing that we need this. Like I say, you sort of feed in the kitty. We need this, or there's a film coming out. We need this music for this film, and this film is for this demographic, and it's all very. I don't know. I find it a little bit too manufactured. I mean, there are people who argue against that, and there's certainly a lot of musicians now that are sort of going back to playing old instruments and doing sort of gigs, sort of acoustic gigs and things like that, that are trying to get away from this sort of manufactured stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, that's why I sort of tend to fall sort of more on stuff I would say pre-1977. I think there's not been much new music since 1977. I think it was Eno that said that. But
That's a powerful loaded statement that I'm.
a thesis statement right there. On that note,
Yeah.
I've sent you Ask Stevie Moore.
Yeah.
There's a couple of, can we do that? Can we seg that into each other? Is that possible? The short one and the long one?
Yeah. We'll put it together. So,
Yeah.
so this is. Oh, what came before ours? So
It
that was the
California Rhythm is the second one. So the one that says
explainer.
explain
Yeah.
the awesome. Just to line you up for this was an album that came out in 1976, and this Stevie Moore, and in England we say Stevie, is a guy that really was one of the sort of pioneers, trailblazers, if you like, of the sort of independent punk music industry, if you like. He'd recorded this. Somebody had given him a 4-track tape recorder for his 20th birthday, and you can imagine 4 tracks, not a lot of tracks. So you know, this is an album that what you're going to hear is pretty much as the album sounds. It's not clean or pristine. There's a lot of peas popping and a lot of dropout and stuff like that, but it sounds great. So this is him introducing a little bit. He's basically walking around the rooms of his house and then introducing his songs. And the main song you're going to hear is called California Rhythm.
Yeah, let's go to it right now.
Well, I'm really not too sure exactly what I want to do, but I think the main thing you have to do is be kind of involved with other people, you know.
Yes.
At the same time, you're helping people.
Of course.
But you make out all right yourself. I mean, you know, you get money and stuff.
Well, how do you get that? What else?
Also,
Go ahead, say it. Don't be afraid. Go on.
and
What do you mean?
I don't know. Just try to live.
What?
Just try to live, you know.
Well, we all.
Not just go around doing nothing. Just be by yourself and not do anything for anybody else.
So you got a point.
Because, I mean, it's just more existing than living.
Right. Well, who are you?
And hits from coast to coast. California rhythm. I haven't been there for years. It take American men too long to get there from here. Yay! I dig a California season.
Boy Got Rhythm. It's from California.
Yeah, have you ever been out to California?
No, I've only been to the east side of America. I would love to go to California.
Yeah, yeah. It,
Yeah.
it doesn't all sound like that, but
No. But yeah.
but you'll hear it
What
on
does it
occasion.
sound like?
It just sounds like the waves breaking over rocks.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
So yeah, to be honest, I thought artists. So that a quirky tune was a nice bit of rhythm. I think definitely.
It's California rhythm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I actually thought you might go into the library music because we were kind of talking about this idea of like, music,
Yeah.
or not as art necessarily, but it's like serving a purpose.
Right.
And so yeah, tell us a bit about library music.
Library. Well, one of my students, I was playing it in the classroom last year sometime, and he said, "Teacher, what's this music?" I said, "Oh, it's library music, And he was like, "But teacher, we can't play music in the library."
He's a good student.
Exactly. The library it's referring to is you would have a library of like a resource really of backing music for television and radio, and that was primarily what it was for. So it was these agencies. KPM was a big one. I mean, there's lots and lots, but they would produce these sort of lots and lots of these albums that sort of reflected various moods. I think there's a French one called Teledisc. There's literally hundreds of records that would try and fit into a mood that you were looking for your particular production stroke program.
It's like stock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you'd have stock footage. This
Yeah.
was stock music, and there was. I mean, the people that worked in them. For example, KPM that I mentioned had a guy called Brian Bennett, and Brian Bennett was the drummer of a group called the Shadows. Certainly big in the UK. I don't know. Did they make any big songs in America? They did Apache that was very famous.
That sounds familiar.
But Cliff Richard's backing band, basically. So you'd see this guy, he's in Cliff Richard films, he's there playing his drums and he's the drummer in the Shadows. But then his other life, and I guess this is how he made his money, because I suppose he didn't write a lot of songs in the Shadows. So let's try and cut it being a drummer stroke musical arranger. He'd go and sort of write stuff that was specifically for television. So there'd be various television theme tunes and whole albums of sort of bass and rhythm that were designed really just to back people chasing each other down streets with Vauxhall Vivas and stuff. Yeah,
And that's a very different challenge.
yeah. The thing I liked, I mean, I was bemoaning this just before the show. This music was a little bit kind of, not a lot of people knew about it. It was a bit secret because these records weren't, you couldn't walk into HMV or whatever and buy these records very easily at the time. They went out to radio stations. There were sort of strict limitations on how when they were made, I guess. I mean, they're around. You can buy them. They're not mega. Some of them are mega expensive, but
But how were these used on the radio? So it's like for television. I
Yeah.
understand like they kind of just serve, kind of a tight budget on a
Yeah.
show. But how would a radio use them?
they would use them as. I mean, I've got. I think this album that we're going to play, the Teenage Chase, has got certain tracks that are made to be underlays, what we call underlays. Like there'd be a presenter on air like we are now, but it'd be more, I don't know, more sort of, hello, good morning and welcome. It's a sunny morning in London and whatever. And they'd be playing this music underneath,
I
like
see.
a
Okay.
bedding music, we call it. So they'd play it, for example, like that. They might use it, I mean, they would use it, for example, for a theme tune for a show. That sort of thing. So, and some of these, I mean, some of the music, you'll play it, these records, a lot of it's on Spotify. And all of a sudden, in the middle of all this sort of music that you've probably not heard, there'll be a theme tune to a sitcom or something.
Yeah, that's just going to hit you like a
like Terry
thunderbolt.
and June or something like that. Yeah, it's just in the middle of all this random other stuff. And that was it, So if you wanted to use that as a theme, you could do it. So that explains why, for example, I've had stories that there were various pieces of music that were used for news and current affairs programs in the UK and I'd talk to somebody from Australia or even from Turkey, they'd say, "Oh, that was used for another program in Turkey, but it wasn't that program; it was another program."
Yeah.
But it was just that particular program was sort of, with current affairs, you've got that sort of thing going on with, like the broadcasting tower type music, and so people would use it worldwide, and that was the beauty of library, really.
Do you watch Turkish television that much?
Not if I can help it. I was watching. There was one I was watching last night. It was quite sinister. I don't know what you call the name of the program. I was on a show. That's another thing. This one was where they've got some woman that murdered. So it's quite.
Like the
Everybody's
ex-wife
talking
or
about
something.
it.
Yeah.
And the brother
It's the seaside
oh
mansion.
My giddy aunt.
Yeah. I don't watch local telly.
Oh, it was,
But when my wife was here, I would hear it, because she kind of got into it to unwind at night. She wasn't paying attention to the storylines, but she would just have it on. So the reason, so that's when that was being promoted last year or more, actually.
Right.
I was quite tickled because I felt, that's a proper grisly storyline.
Right.
But the thing there's two things that have always stood out to me about Turkish television, is that the camera is almost always moving.
Yeah.
They use a lot more handheld, and that just always caught my eye, that the camera methods, the style was different than American shows.
Sure.
The other thing was every show has this type of music you're talking about.
Right.
Well, they will use it 10 or more times per episode.
Well,
which
there's another thing,
Yeah.
because one thing I've noticed, I mean, we're talking about dramas here, but with any kind of game show, there was that one with the red box and the blue box. You remember that one? I don't know what it was.
No.
Again, in England, it was called Deal or No Deal.
Oh, yeah, Deal or No Deal. Okay,
Yeah,
well,
well,
yeah, I know that.
It's a worldwide format.
Yeah.
But in England, that show would be like 40 minutes long. And they'd get through it, that's it, everybody go home. In Turkey, that same show would go on for 4 hours.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And they'd just be ramping the audience up like, oi, oi, oi, oi, oi, and then, time for a commercial break.
But the commercial break being 30 minutes long,
Right.
which is another unusual feature of Turkish broadcast.
And the sound going up about 10 decibels, so that if you go to the bathroom or you're in the kitchen or something like that, you can hear it.
Yeah.
'Cause you're not going to miss it. You've got to buy that cola, and you've got to get that kofta, and get some nice tea and look after yourself. All of that stuff. But yeah, they use that music. The first time it occurred to me here was we were watching. I don't know why we were doing this, but we were watching Azerbaijan TV, Azerbaijan 1 or whatever it is, and there was a piece of music that was showing like the history of Azerbaijan. It was like. And this music was like
Wonderfully appropriate.
And the reason I knew it was a theme tune in the 1980s to a program in England called First Tuesday, which was like a sort of, I don't know, they were always the first on the scene, and the sort of investigative journalism and things like that. But yeah, it just that's the kind of thing.
Yeah, there must be in-jokes, because you know about the famous sound effect, not sound effect, the scream.
The famous scream.
In almost every action film,
All right.
there's this one iconic, and I can't remember the name of it because it's very, it's named after the sound engineer who worked on the film, or some forgettable Western.
Right.
And you'll see it in every Star Wars movie has it once. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds of films will have this one iconic male scream that almost takes you out of the film the moment you hear it. Yeah, because it's so silly. And
have you ever seen that film? There was somebody showed me this film. It was made in the 70s in Turkey. That was like I think it was sort of Star Wars era, but it's this guy. He's fighting the world. Have you ever seen it? Where he's fighting, and he's got the most awful fight scenes in it.
is it a Turkish one?
Yeah, this guy, but like
There was a Turkish Star Wars, famously.
that's the one.
Because they actually took footage from Star Wars without license, and they just used it to make a entirely new film, which
fair
is
enough,
considered
I mean,
considered to be one of the worst Turkish films of all time.
But it's
but
so
famous.
bad it's good. I mean, it's famously bad.
To be honest, I've seen some stuff when I was living in Konya. You know, the boys on the I was staying for a little bit in a dorm, university dorm, and you know, on Saturday and Sunday, the boys are just kind of waiting for the football match maybe to come on. They're gonna watch something on the big screen, and it's gonna be these, you know, Saturday movies, you know,
All right.
70s films, and it's always like Turkish Death Wish or something. Though a lot of those films had pretty frequent nudity that you just don't see anymore. But so they're evident. So the ones that they broadcast now don't have. They're not
No,
uncensored.
No.
But they're amazing because you can kind of recognize that that's a New York storyline, but now it's in Istanbul, which kind of fits in its own ways, and they've kind of localized it. But the acting, and sometimes not even the acting, it's just, you know, it's just that 70s motif. Like, it doesn't matter what country. B movies of the 70s are just usually completely watchable because the style is just so outlandish.
Yeah.
And everybody plays it. I saw a man who somehow didn't save this woman from being murdered. And so he's at the gravesite. You know, he's like a police officer or something, a detective. And the murdered woman had a daughter who's now an orphan, who's like 7. And she's blaming him, you know, and she's yelling. And, of course, all the audio is always dubbed afterwards. So the volumes are always way off. And she picks up a rock because she's so angry. And the rock is half her size. She's 7 years old. And the rock is, I mean, it's a boulder.
Yeah. I mean,
And she throws it well beyond what this girl could ever have thrown a rock of that size. And it hits the hero in the head. And he doesn't flinch. He just takes because he's just a man of strength and honor. And he understands that he's failed and the daughter is, you know, is and it's
Plus
just
you
like
can throw a
that
rock
man
that
just got
far.
hit by a rock bigger than his head. And he shook it off like nothing, you know. And they just play it so straight. And then, of course, famously, there was the one where the movie ends with the man has been shot to death, but he dies standing up. He's still standing, but he's dead and shot to pieces. And you know, just stuff like that, where it's like that's a special time and place and a whole lot of cocaine that made that script seem logical to
well,
shoot.
yeah, people obviously went and saw that stuff. I mean,
And
that's-
loved it. I mean,
yeah.
it's YouTube it's found a second life. All the Yeşilçam films.
It always makes me. I tell you what, the other thing, you weren't wrong about the soundproof of this. It's the lovely tray clatter in there. It was great.
Yeah. It sounds soundproof when no one's making any sounds around.
Well, that's it. It's an illusion. I mean, it's got the egg cartons as I say on the wall, but I quite like that though. It kind of adds to the sort of candor of the show. It's
Yeah. I mean, I kind of wish we were facing the other way. Because
Okay.
so where we are, we're facing kind of out. We're facing at a
we're
wall
not facing the action.
and some doors that
Yeah.
go out to this patio. Where if we weren't shooting at night, we weren't recording at night. People might be out there. But behind us are like the main stairs for the campus. So like there's tons of people in theory aware that somebody is in the studio right now. But man, we've gone off track. I want to play this track. I want to play
Yes.
this.
Teenage Chase.
Yeah, let's play this. So this is library music for
Keith
those who haven't heard
Mansfield
it.
from 1969 and released in mono. So that's a bit of a treat for you.
Treat mono.
Shalabang.
Yeah, I mean, that sets a mood, doesn't it?
Doesn't it? I mean, Teenage Chase, that was called. I mean, you can just sort of see it, can't you?
Yeah,
All
and
the-
you know, one, I mean, I just wonder if that satisfied like an artistic itch that he had. You know, maybe he had like because so you know, for some like TV theme songs, there's one in my mind that comes to Squidbillies. It's this awesome, violent, surrealist southern cartoon from Georgia, and it's got this. God, what is he playing? It's like a ukulele he plays.
All right.
But you know, plays like a guitar more than a ukulele.
Okay.
And so there was an interview, like it's such a distinctive sound, and it kind of features into a lot of what they've got in the show at different points. And the guy who recorded that and wrote it was like, yeah, he's like, I had this 30 seconds. I couldn't make it a song, but I just had this one little bit that was just really good, and I couldn't find anything else to do with it. But it could be the theme to a 11-minute show.
Well, that's the I mean, I like that. One of the things about library music is that record that comes from. Most of the tracks are probably under 1 minute, and they'll have titles like that was Teenage Chase. It'd be like Teenage Chase, Slight Return, or Small Teenage Chase, or like Man with Knife Following Me, or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, they're very, very specific that you could imagine being used as sort of incidental music. But one of the things is you can use it just as a, you know, if you've got something that's under a minute, it can add texture to, you know, certainly in a DJ set and on a radio program like the one I do, that it just makes it more interesting.
Yeah.
And it just sort of detracts the attention for sort of just a moment. And I think there's a lot to be said for short tracks. Are you familiar with Wire, the punk band?
I'm not, no.
Post-punk band, I guess. They had an album called Pink Flag. And the album, it's a normal running time for an album. There's something like, I don't know, about 20 tracks on that album. The average time for the song is about 45 seconds. And it was the ultimate punk album.
Yeah, I was
because
going to say, yeah, that's
went
the,
in,
yeah.
said what the hell they wanted, and got the hell out. That was it. There was no pussyfooting around. It was like, you know, oh, my girlfriend saw my toast today. Da, da, da, da, da. It's really not on, and that'll be it. Finished. And I like that. It's one of the things I do on Connections on my show is I do in the middle. I do a soap opera. I call it a soap opera. It's not really a soap opera, but and often I'll do a little bit of music on there. I'm not really a musician as such, but I'd like to sort of mash things together. And one of the challenges of that is that I'll be this pretend band or something like that, and I'll try and encapsulate what I'm trying to do within about 20 seconds, and it's quite good fun to do it. You know, you can make a sort of 20-second song. It's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, that's what I wonder. Like, if this was actually not just paying the bills, but maybe just, you know, kind of, you know, a little bit of just something dancing in my head, and I want to get it out and, you know, make something of it rather than just I play it for myself and no one ever hears it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this 3-minute song is that's all commercial. That's commercial radio right
Yeah,
there.
that's exactly.
This sort of format of music is sort of designed for that. Certainly, classical music wasn't like that, but I do like short songs. That excites me. If ever I've got an album, doesn't matter what genre. It can be classical, it can be library, punk, whatever. If you've got something that's short, to me, that's interesting. You know, that's adding a little bit of texture.
Well, that sounds like a challenge to put together a radio show playlist that's just like every song's under a minute. I mean, you could totally do it, but imagine how many songs you'd have to.
I mean, you could. By the way, we've got one on here that's 45 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the perfect segue. Let's go ahead and play it real quick.
Let's do it.
We've got to get at least a couple more songs before we finish up.
Yeah, we are.
That was Freestyle.
Freestyle by Johnny Hawkins. That was Freestyle by Johnny Hawkins. Did you recognise any of that?
That sounded very familiar.
That,
Yeah.
that bit that goes da da da da da da, that was used in Primal Scream's Loaded. So that goes out to Mr. Wetherell. That was a component part of that. He used, I think, that and a track by The Emotions. But it's amazing how those people have that vision to mix something together that sounds completely different, you know?
I mean, it's all about context. So I mean, I guess going back to like the Hey Jude thing. I mean, for me, the Hey Jude, that cover, was really very, very different. I mean, it was like a love song where I didn't get that from the Beatles version of Hey Jude. It was more like I thought it was like kind of like a bit of off-brand therapy to a woman in need or something. Like, but the way Wilson Pickett was like, just context. Like you really can. You can take an essence of it and it completely changes.
Well, the Beatles one was written, I mean, they on the anthology, they sort of allude to it being written for Julian Lennon, who'd gone through, I mean, his parents were sort of in the process of getting a divorce. Incidentally, that year, 1968, my grandma bought a bag of, you call them chips in America, but my grandma bought Julian Lennon a bag of crisps in Italy. There you are. And she said he was a mardy little beggar. But if you're listening, Julian, I'm sure you've matured nicely now. But it was for Julian. But then it was going to be Hey Jules, and then it was like Hey Jude.
Yeah,
don't take it back. Yeah. And one of the nicest things was the lyrics of that. The movement you need is on your shoulder. Paul McCartney sort of said, I don't like that because it sounds like, what does that mean? And John was like, that's the best line in the whole song.
Yeah.
And it's that I'd have thrown that out straight away, but then somebody else says keep it. It's
that's why you have bands. I mean, that's
exactly.
That's why it's so hard to become a solo artist, and for all the talent of all the members of the Beatles, they never. And most bands like the same. Like, it's very rare for someone to come out of a really great, successful band and be great on their own, not because of the lack of talent, but just because it's, collaboration is often so necessary for more sophisticated creation.
Well, it's a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, isn't it? And it's that combination of minds, I guess, that somebody can see that. I mean, it's interesting what you said about the interpretations of Hey Jude. I like you say, I kind of imagine that it's the ultimate sort of 1968 kind of beginning to break up kind of party song a bit, no. Any party in the UK, like any nightclub, they start playing that even now. All the guys just get like their arms around each other. It's like, no.
That's Bohemian Rhapsody for I think the US. Certainly when I was going to clubs.
Yeah, it's kind of, the story behind that song. That's a song that's sort of 5 minutes plus.
Yeah.
And that was going to be overlooked by a lot of people. And it was a DJ that was someone I think a great deal of, Kenny Everett, that was on Capital Radio.
Yeah, I know the name. Yeah.
And he picked that up, and he was very into he was kind of into classical music, and I think he just sort of picked up the nuances of that and said, "Hey, you've got to listen to this." And God love him. That's why we've got Bohemian Rhapsody now. But it has that. It's that bit at the end. It was sort of in Wayne's World, wasn't it, where they're all in that car? Yeah. You've got to have the long hair and everything, which I've been trying to get mine like that for years, but it's just not going to go.
Well, you just got to wait on it.
Yeah.
It'll come. It'll come. Don't you worry.
Well, you get to a certain point and you just stop bothering. I mean, if I grow it out, it just looks like my head looks like a triangle, so I have to keep it closely cropped like a footballer.
Yeah, it's just so much work. I can't be bothered to cut my hair. That is a subject for another radio show. I think
so. Talk about hair. What's your favorite style of hair?
Which is, I mean, I love to talk about. Like sometimes it comes up, like we're talking about something that, where it's so visual. It's essential to see what you're talking about. Yet we're talking about it on the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find myself enjoying the moment of realization that we've just spent a lot of time talking about something that can't be appreciated to anyone who's not in the room. Because it is like we've undermined the whole point, the whole value of radio by saying, oh, this would be better if it was televised.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get that now. There's a lot of radio shows that are televised.
I might start one, actually.
You reckon?
Well, I mean, I've been offered for something for a bit specific to my industry. So in that sense, like, For me, I prefer radio just because I don't know. It just
Well, it's
I like to focus on the words.
it serves to sort of build you can paint a picture with words on the radio. I can tell you about my hair, and you can have a sort of mental. If you've never seen me, you can have a mental picture of my hair. But
Yeah.
if you see it, bang, it's just there. It's like there's nothing
Yeah,
to
yeah,
explain.
There's lots to talk about
Like,
because
you
when
saved me 5 minutes, but
yeah,
then
that's the thing. When you know that they don't know, they can't see it. You have to set the context.
right.
And that's half the fun of the subject. It's not just about giving information; it's about telling a story.
Yeah.
And radio just kind of necessitates that a little bit more than television does. I mean, television just brings its own challenges. So yeah, I'll do it, but for me, it's going to be much more based off of the industry that I work in. So I'm going to take it more from like this will maybe be business development for me, professional development. People will see my face, recognize me if I go to a conference or something. But it's not
Well,
going to be the
it's-
same thing as radio.
Talking of conferences, we walked through something on the way here. That was something. That was
Oh,
some
yeah,
conference going
yeah.
on
I
right
mean-
there. Walking through, it was quite dangerous actually. Walking through Hallam. That was something.
And that's music I don't think you're ever going to hear that music on the radio.
No, funny that.
So that was at Coach University this weekend and last weekend and the weekend before. Just I guess the various student business clubs, and I don't know if they're all the same club.
It was very business.
But yeah, they bring in almost always the exact same brands, bring in exactly the same stands, giving out exactly the same biscuits and cookies, and yet
That's why people go to those things, wasn't it? It's always to get the sort of free fridge magnets and
yeah, the swag,
Yeah,
as they say.
Yeah, you get a carrier bag, and it probably reduces sort of amount of stuff you get in there now. But the biro pen and the
Yeah.
notebook and
I mean, I don't mind the cookies being left out unguarded as I'm walking by.
That's
So
all right.
I'm
Yeah,
not I'm
no
not I'm
problem
not
with that
against
at
them.
all.
Yeah, I'm not against them in totality, but
No.
but definitely like yeah. Today it was I don't know, it could have been 80 people in a ring around a staircase of
That's right. Yeah, it was
dancing in a circle like at a
pretty
wedding.
spectacular.
Yeah,
And there was like the periphery of that circle. Was there literally were
yeah.
at some points there were inches. There were I mean it was quite.
well,
difficult to get through.
I mean, you were coming after me. I hope I like an icebreaker kind of cleared the way because I was elbowing basically everyone who was dancing.
Well, you're
in a
wearing
circle.
orange, so you're like a big
Yeah.
marker boy.
Yeah,
I could see where I was going, and that was good. But had I not had that to lead the way, I don't know what I would have done. I would
Well,
have
yeah.
probably been in a halai now, just going around in circles around a staircase.
Oh, they're probably still doing it.
Yeah. I mean, completely oblivious to anything we've done on here, but yeah, we are.
Yeah,
I
you
think
can't
listen
win
to
them all.
podcasts,
You
eh?
can't, and you can't compete with the energy that they had going on.
Well, we've got another piece of music that's big in Japan. Have we got time for that?
Yeah, we definitely do because I don't see. This is the beauty of sometimes university radio is that most students don't really want to be here. They
Well, that's fair enough.
they want to do a show until they got to come up to campus and do a show instead of going to a club or something.
Ah, damn.
So I don't see the group that's after us,
All right.
and they'd only ever been here once before. So
Okay.
yeah, we definitely got time for
Oh,
at
that's
least one
good.
song. So big in Japan, Suicide, a go
Go go.
Creatures of the flood run naked in
was big in Japan, and Suicide a Go-Go.
And I wonder if that was indeed big in Japan.
I don't think it was. That was the irony. They travelled to Japan, I think, to write that. I think it was about a liaison he'd had with some lass in Japan. And the singer of that band had a silver head. That was another thing. That
A
was
silverhead.
a silver head. You'd remember that. I mean, that might have made them quite big in Japan.
Yeah.
yeah,
Which
They
That's
travelled
too
to
blue to ask
Japan.
which.
But yeah,
Yeah.
but it was that was one of the sort of first what I call indie bands. They were on Zoo Records in Liverpool. And it
Oh,
was,
really?
yeah, that kind of arrangement where they would, I mean, these indie labels would sort of bypass the men in suits, if you like. They'd sort of were in the provinces, and they kind of operated out of a Ford Transit van, a lot of them, and they do their own printing, and not specifically that single, but there's stories of sort of certain singles where they printed it in house. And it was like one colour, or maybe two colours if they got a bit of money. And there'd be these paper that when you opened it, it was obviously like some photocopied paper that had been used for something else.
So there's
They got
something on the back.
flyers or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You just don't get stuff like that.
Well, I
anymore.
guess growing up in a later decade, like me, never really seeing vinyls around, and not really appreciating just how many millions would have been printed.
Yeah.
So I mean, so that's we didn't even talk about we talked about where you go to get them in Istanbul. We didn't talk about like how you go around and things you've discovered in other places. But I mean, like, it's the fact that there are maybe hundreds of millions of vinyls still existing.
I mean, it's vinyl, so I mean, it's like the plastic island in the ocean. I mean, it doesn't go away very quickly. And
I wonder how many are in the ocean.
how many records? I mean, if I saw one, I'd have to dive in and get it.
Yeah.
They kind of sink. They're not very buoyant.
Okay, all right. Well, that's
Yeah, the
Well, they could
buoyancy
be-
of 45s is not really something that they considered. I think
they weren't thinking ahead.
Yeah.
But that opens up the possibility that there is some like sunken treasure,
Yeah.
to be discovered. Because I hope they don't dissolve very much.
No, I don't think they dissolve certainly not in about 30 or 40 years. I mean, they might get battered quite a bit,
Yeah.
but I don't think they'd
Maybe it's
dissolve.
a shipwreck to be discovered in the
Oh,
future.
shiver me timbers and all that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think I told you the other day, I was in South Africa a few years ago, and I went to a shop called Mabu Vinyl, which is famous for the Rodriguez film. It was the guy that did that. His name is Sugarman, and film was called Searching for Sugarman. And he has a record shop there, and I thought, get me a bit of that. Go to a famous record shop, bit of vinyl tourism. So I'd just spent a few days on safari, sort of going around in an old Toyota, looking at elephants, and a bit of a break in Cape Town. And went into this shop, and I was expecting, I thought, well, this is probably quite a classy shop. They've probably got some stuff I might be interested in. And they didn't. It was all like Marvin and Diana and James Last and sort
The
of,
mainstream hits, yeah.
not even. I mean, just dross really. I mean, it was not bad. I mean, I guess if you like Marvin and Diana, but it just was middle of the road. I think that's mainstream. Is probably a good way of putting it. And then this guy said, "Oh, you want our basement shop?" And so I went home and I said to Elif, "Oh, tomorrow I'm going to a basement to look at some records." He said, "You what?" This is like Cape Town, where it's there's metal bars in front of doors at 6 p.m.
Yeah,
and
there's
stuff like that.
there's a dynamic social scene there.
Right. You don't. I mean, there's certain places in town you can go, but most you just don't. But this was in this sort of leafy suburb, and the guy Sugarman opened the door to me. He had a big dog, and he showed me down to this basement. And I remember there was a Greek guy that was on his hands and knees who'd been there for like 3 days, looking literally through the records that had been in this basement. So they had a lot, and I had about 3 hours, so couldn't really do it justice. But you can spend a lot of time in those places. And I think, going back to Turkey and going back to those Sahaf shops and looking around those, you do get an idea of, just how much there is out there and how much...
Yeah. It's just a lost...
Yeah.
I mean, not lost, because obviously those who lived in the time are completely aware of it, but it's just so different a medium
Yeah.
than the generations who came later that largely it's just oblivious. I mean, generations are oblivious to it, and I think that's interesting about technology. How quickly this is often something discussed now about the preservation and protection of data. Is that we make so much more of it than ever before because we're so much more digitized. But that when formats change, there are films, for example, and many other things, software that simply cannot be run. It would require someone to go back and really retro engineer how you would play that because the encryption, maybe not even the encryption, but just the context, the hardware and the underlying software that would have been necessary for that program to function is not currently available or accessible, and so that program, fully existing as it is simply inaccessible. And in 20 years, that happens.
Somebody did that recently. Again, this is on YouTube, I think. But there was a format. I think it was might have been John Logie Baird, the inventor of the television. It was certainly someone in his periphery, but they were experimenting with videos. This is as long ago as the sort of 1920s. I mean, not the videos kind of know now, but it was a way of taking something that could instantly be put onto a format and then played. And this was done on, I think it was done onto 10-inch discs, you know, a little bit like the 78 RPM records.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of got a great deal on there. But they had a disc that somebody had created from about 1929, I think. It was some dance or something like that. Might have even been earlier, but it was certainly in the 1920s. And nobody had any kind of equipment to play this thing on. I mean, to all intents and purposes, just looked like a record. And this, I mean, genius of a guy managed somehow to sort of decode what was on the information that was on this disc, and has managed to reproduce what would have been on it. And it was. I'll have to find the video, but it was like, you know, this is the picture that the world has waited 80 years to see of whatever it was. I mean, 90 now. And it was this crappy picture of somebody. It wasn't even in focus. It was just a close-up of some woman dancing. That was it, you know, and it was about 3 seconds of it.
And it was worth probably months, months.
Painstaking. I mean, years probably of so, I mean, it always fascinates me, though. You know,
look about Betamax.
Yeah,
I mean, if Betamax tapes exist, there's probably more Betamax tapes than there are Betamax players.
Well, there was V2000. Do you remember that?
No.
That came third in a sort of 2-format race. I mean, I remember my mum getting a video player for the first time, and we went home, and she was sort of telling a friend, "Oh, we've ordered a video player." We were quite late; it was like the mid-80s or something. And she said, "Oh, I hope it's not V2000. Oh, you won't be able to get anything to play on it." And I remember dreading, you know, because it was in the days before you could sort of look on the internet and see what you'd actually got or anything like that. So I remember the night we got it, I was sort of praying that we'd not got a V2000 and that this thing, oh no, it's VHS, you know, and yeah, okay. But I mean, again, I've got VHS tapes that I can still play. I mean, I haven't got anything to play them on, but I know they still played when I did last play them, which was not that long ago. And yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, pretty crappy picture-wise if you compare it to DVDs,
but I guess, you know, in a way, but some of it was. I have to go back and think about the VHS because those were analog, just like cassette. In theory, cassette audio quality at the higher frequencies are superior than a CD, which is set to 44,000 samples per second. You know, and that's where it suffers at the higher frequencies. That, you know, you just can't get it doesn't capture the richness of that waveform. But something like film, proper film, it's analog, it's chemical, so all that detail is effectively there. It's how you're able to read it off. Though in the case of like a cassette, I know those were magnetic strips basically. So there's like filaments. We actually, you know, you could make in like a little school experiment. You can make
a tape.
Yeah, you can make tapes. Yeah, which you know, it's just. I remember I learned it at a time in which, well, that's awesome, but it does seem to be a dying skill even at the time I'm learning it.
Does it make a sound if you record anything onto it?
Yeah.
It's not like.
Yeah, you can read it back off.
Yeah.
I mean, we could. I mean, we didn't record anything of value on it, but
It's
but
probably
it was
priceless
just
now.
neat. Yeah, just neat to see how those work. Because then you just extrapolate that. You get older, you get into technology a bit more. If you study along that path, and you're like, well, hard disks are just magnetic disks.
Well, one thing that I remember my granddad telling me, my granddad was a cine photography enthusiast of the day. You know, he'd get the old Super 8, Standard
Yeah.
8 cine film. And something very interesting he noted, because he had that cine camera till the day he died. I mean, he didn't use it really in his later years, but certainly into the 90s he was using it, which the film was pretty expensive to get. And I said, Grandad, why don't you get a video camera,
Yeah.
as it was then? And he sort of made a good analogy. He sort of used the analogy of my auntie's wedding film, of which there was a video of it and there was a cine film of it. And he said the cine film at that time was like £12 sterling for a reel of 5 minutes. He said when you've got that, when you're paying that money, you're a lot more careful what you're actually pointing the camera at. Whereas with a video camera, you could get 3 hours for like tuppence or whatever it was on one of those old VHSs. And when you watch my auntie's video of her wedding, it's like a dark room with bodies jumping up and down for 3 hours,
Yeah.
literally. I mean, because you could do that. But with a cine film, you pointed at something and then you pointed at something else because you think, oh, that's really expensive film.
It's a lot more. Yeah. Now that's
There's a lot of-
completely true. Because I became a photographer. I took probably, if I count it, over. I guess I got to 100,000 photos in about 6 years, and it was digital, of course. And thankfully, after 6 months or so, I switched to manual. Because I wanted to have a lot more control over it.
Oh, yeah.
Which then, of course, while you're learning it, kicks up the number of wasted photos for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I used to ask photographers, like photojournalists that always are coming through Istanbul, I used to ask them like, I want to be a photographer, but how? What should I be looking for? And the funny bit was that these guys who were in the Guardian and all these other famous publications around the world, they're like, just take more photos.
Yeah.
I just take more.
Just keep
And
them going.
after a while, like I just came to realize, yeah, only when I'm developing them do I really understand what I have. In the
Right.
moment, usually that shot that I really tried to get, and at that moment, I thought, oh, this is gonna be a great shot. Yeah, I was usually disappointed by it. It was never as good as in my mind, and maybe that's because of my lack of skill. I'm just not that good. But the compensation for being not so good is just take so much more. Statistically, increase your odds of a really good shot.
Well, that's the thing now, because I used to. I mean, I've dabbled in photography. I wouldn't call myself a photographer per se, but I like photography, and certainly with phones and stuff, you've always got a camera with you, and I like playing around with filters and stuff like that. But I just remember in the 80s, I had again, it was my auntie's wedding I was talking about. My dad used to have a shop, and he was kind of running that. So me and my mum were at this wedding, and my sister, and she got one of those 110 cameras they were cheap cameras.
Okay.
They were like rectangular film of the day, And she said, "Oh, here, Tim, take this camera, take some nice pictures of your Auntie D, or whatever." And so I went round, and I thought, "Oh, she's giving me carte blanche with this camera," and I'm like 10 years old. So I remember trying to be artistic with this 110 camera. And like I remember getting it close to one of my granddad's roses, thinking, "Oh, this is going to look absolutely fantastic. My mum's going to be so proud of me." It looked great through those old viewfinders, and it used to frame it for you. And the problem with those cameras was what you saw through the viewfinder wasn't necessarily what you got through the lens. And I ended up with like a picture of soil. It was, yeah.
That's not a really good camera.
Yeah.
From a design standpoint.
It wasn't a very good camera at all. But unfortunately, I'd gone round my granddad's garden with this camera, thinking I was like David Bailey, and my mum had 3 blurred pictures of my auntie, and then the rest of it was just pictures of soil and car registration plates.
So
Didn't go down too well.
yeah, did she really have very high expectations? Because I feel
I
like you're
guess
setting
not,
setting
no.
yourself up for a little bit of disappointment when you give a kid a camera
Yeah.
and say, "Hey, get something good with it."
Well,
That's
I
a
just
little
think
unfair.
it was. I think I was just trying to be clever. I think I was trying. I was looking in magazines and looking at sort of pictures I could.
But that's the
kind of
bit
emanate.
everybody does.
Yeah.
You give someone a camera who doesn't really use it very much, and at an event,
Yeah.
That's exactly what everybody does. We've all, I mean, anyone with a camera has done it.
Yeah.
And having tried to teach, tried to use like photography projects for like refugee kids in Palestine, seeing people come in with this idea that you're going to give these kids a camera and then they're going to go out and document their life. It doesn't work that way. Like, because they're shooting anything. There's no experience there. Their hands and eyes have no ability to function with the camera.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you tend to, and I remember when I first started buying black and white film and thinking, oh, again, I'm David Bailey.
Immediately artistic, right? When you take color out.
And things like, I mean, now I look back on it. I'd got a picture I took, and we were at my granddad had a holiday home, and it was like there was a sea view, but it was a long way away. And I sort of took a picture of what effectively was a car park, an empty car park.
Oh, but it's so poetic, right?
Yeah, right. I remember my granddad looking at it and saying, "Look, Tim, this is all right, but if you put like a car in there that was because it was just an empty car park," he said, "Like, what is your subject here?" I said, "Well, it's the car park." I mean,
yeah, it's the emptiness.
He sort of he was very good at photography like that. He sort of said, "Well, if you like imagine somebody looking at that, what are you taking a picture of? It's basically a fence." Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was a very sort of basic lesson, but there you go.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to do with photography, and there's a lot of obviously the majority of it's just a space for self exploration.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't think you should give anyone, let alone a child, the weight of expectation to do something meaningful with that first camera. It's
there's a book in there somewhere, isn't there? There's a book.
I mean, they would be amazing. Like
a book
just
of pictures of soil.
If you went around collecting just a series of my first camera results, that would be a book. I worked in a bookstore for many years. We sold a number of things just like that. You could almost put anything quirky would become a coffee table book.
Yeah, I had a book of boring postcards. I love that.
Well, there was actually a series of Post Secret.
Okay.
There was a series of like 4 or 5 of these books. They were actually quite popular. And what it was postcards with some type of self-confession or like bad news given to somebody else. And then instead they tried to turn that into a book. And so it was just like, I cheated on you, or you've got cancer and I don't know how to tell you. Like, just like sometimes really, banal stuff. But some really like just, this is kind of a what's the term? Voyeuristic. I mean, it's that's exactly what the premise of the book was.
Yeah, I mean, it's gossip, isn't it?
Yeah,
basically?
yeah.
Well, with this one, it was the other side of the postcard. But there was this sort of people send a lot of postcards in the 50s and 60s. I used to. I used to go places, but these were so boring. There was a sort of thing in the 60s in England. We had the first, or the 50s, in fact, we had the first motorways.
Yeah.
Highways, you call them in the States, and people would actually go to the service areas on the motorways and watch the cars. This was a pastime. People would. Can you believe that?
I mean, you got to remember how amazing it was to see cars at a point in time.
So there are postcards of service stations, and it's like these cafes with like brown carpets and like and a bridge and
back when you would dress up to go to the service station. You got dressed to go drive your car.
I remember my dad getting excited about spray from lorries.
Yeah,
he used to really. There's going to be spray. Yeah, come on, let's go on the motorway. It was a whole other era. I mean, you can't imagine it now.
Yeah,
but, I still think about it when I'm in the car, but nobody ever says it. I think I'm a bit sad if I say, "Oh, look at that spray! Wow!"
But I mean, that's the point of getting older. Is always remembering, and still maybe getting a little tickle from stuff that used to really impress you in your youth, but just understanding that it's not.
It's ephemera.
It's not socially accepted to be impressed
Keep
or
those
tickled by
thoughts
that.
to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, these are the things that these feelings exist only in documentation and in memories.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I used to always watch because it was cheap for the cable channels in America in those times. They weren't making their own content. I used to watch a lot of Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy, classic films like that, and of course the old Looney Tunes cartoons.
Oh, right.
And it's just like I grew up so aware of how to make a telephone call,
Yeah.
where you went to. There was an operator. I understand. I knew what an operator was.
Operator. Yeah.
Yeah, I
'cause
mean,
they're
like,
all
you
called
just
the operator.
in
and
my
those
life
things,
there was
yeah.
no such thing.
Right.
But I still love to watch those because it's a world that's immediately understandable, and yet you just realize what would that have been like to live in a time where that was how you communicated.
It's pretty amazing.
And everybody there is not. They're not bothered. They're not. That's how you do it. Like there's not an inkling in their mind that this is not convenient.
Well, funny you mentioned your Looney Tunes. I remember I was about 3 years old, so it would have been in the mid-'70s sometime. I remember having a full-on argument with my mum's friend who was round, actually staying with us at the time, as to the beginning of Bugs Bunny cartoon. He's eating a carrot.
Yeah.
Most Bugs Bunny, he would eat a carrot. I was absolutely convinced that he was eating an ice cream. I don't know how that carrot looked like an ice cream to me, but I thought he was eating an ice cream.
Yeah, that's a losing argument.
Yeah. I mean, this is this thing about keeping things to yourself. I've learned since that like, it might look like an ice cream, but it's in fact a carrot,
But yeah, you learn to be a little bit more tactical. You're like, doesn't that look? It doesn't look like an ice cream. And someone might say, well, yeah, I guess kind of an orange ice cream, a carrot flavored ice cream.
It was what I was looking for. I was looking for it to be an ice cream. I mean, the fact that rabbits ate carrots or didn't eat
quite
ice cream.
Freudian, quite Freudian.
It is,
I was
isn't it?
thinking like, it's obviously a cigar. It's obviously a stand-in for a cigar.
Yeah. It could
Which
be
is
that.
funny because in some of the cartoons they are smoking cigars. So at what point did the carrot become like, all right, you
metaphor
can't
for the-
have this is clearly now for children. He wasn't originally, but now he's clearly for children.
Yeah.
So let's drop the smoking.
Let's
so
get,
much.
get a carrot in there. And all that.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a sticking carrot.
Yeah, and of course I'm sure the Carrot Growers Association was quite pleased and probably a little influential in that regulatory decision.
Well, I've never seen a rabbit wearing glasses,
That's what they say. I've eaten a lot of carrots and I still have them.
What are you wearing? You're looking pretty carrot-coloured.
Well, yeah. I mean, speaking of talking about
Promoting
subjects that our audience can't appreciate.
Exactly. Well, I'm painting a picture in your mind. If you just imagine this glow of orange, it's certainly sort of filling the room at the moment.
My hair used to be too, and I have
Your hair was
extra dye
orange.
at home.
All right.
I go for a copper. It's my
Okay,
favorite hair
copper.
color
Okay.
that I've always tried to get. But you didn't see the undershirt.
All right.
Yeah,
That's even deeper orange.
Yeah.
That's taking orange to a whole different level.
Well, I used to, I it's my favorite color,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't even think it's my favorite color. It's just my favorite grouping of colors, because
Orange with deep orange.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I like to think that this is a bit of a neon. This is about construction orange,
All right.
but under is more like a burnt sienna. This is kind of like the
Okay.
sun going down in
Right.
California at the right
Right.
angle. And then of course I got the hat too, which got
Right.
orange on it.
So
So
I've got that. Yeah.
yeah, I got married.
In orange?
My wife would not let me have an orange suit.
No,
She drew the line.
not got married in orange. That would
Yeah,
have been good.
but
actually.
my mom, being the class act that she is, she brought me some orange underwear and socks.
Well, you've got to.
I mean,
Yeah,
so
splash out.
I had the confidence to get married that day.
So
I was-
orange,
I was-
orange really is a big thing for
It's
you.
a
isn't it?
big thing for me. It was always a big thing, but as I got older and I bit more like, you know what, I'm not gonna let society tell me that some type of red is the color of the day, the color that should be appreciated. Because orange is, I think there's a lot of people who are a bit closeted about orange.
It was. I mean, there were some bad connotations. I moved into a house, or as a family, we moved into a house in the early 1980s that had been built in the mid 70s, and I'd gone from having this bedroom that my mum and dad had done out for me, that was like blue, because I guess it's kind of gender specific, but I had blue carpet, blue bedspread, blue. It was blue everywhere. And I liked that room a lot. It was, a little box room. And moved to this house, and the wall was pretty much that colour that you're wearing.
It's just a hard sell. It's
Yeah.
hard to sell property with strong colors.
And the added, the orange, okay, I could live with that. But the carpet was brown with kind of splashes of green, orange, and I think it was like a purple colour.
I mean,
Yeah.
I hope you didn't chuck that out. I hope you saved that because I
It
might
was
be able
there
to.
for a few years. It was there for a few years. I think it eventually got replaced. I think my sister had that room in the end, but certainly behind the radiator, the old orange was still there.
Yeah.
There's a sort of archaeology about houses. I think I've heard people that had houses in England that were sort of built in the post-war years,
Mhm.
sort of late 40s, I guess. and somebody was stripping the paintwork, and that this is, it's like archaeology, and that they said that when they got to the basically the first coat of paint or the first wallpaper, these colours were so bright that they were having, and I think it was like the sort of post-war austerity they were trying to beat or something like that. But it's quite typical for people to have houses that were in very garish colours at that time.
Well, yes, talking about like losing information, losing very quickly. Just something of the human experience. There's no question, architecture is part of it, and the aesthetics that are easy to replace. The building's going to stay there for a while, but yeah, the interior paint, the wallpaper, all that stuff's, it's gone in 5 years, and then it's almost like it never existed. If it's just a new trend comes,
Well, yeah, I remember my dad was a bit of an interior decorator. He didn't do it for a trade, but he was pretty good with a paintbrush and stuff. And he drew on our lounge wall once. It was like white on white. It was like white on magnolia or whatever. But he drew like a cowboy, and I just wondered if
if
ever anybody's decorated in that house, they sort of stripped it back and they found my dad's cowboy. I don't know. It's possible. It's it's paint archaeology. I think there's a whole series of shows about paint archaeology.
There must be, because again, it's just like you are discovering a style that before color photos and color film, like so much of that. It's always fascinating when you see like films of World War II and World War One when they get colorized. World War One recently was colorized.
Yeah, World War One.
Really, I saw maybe the last 5 or so years I started to see like.
Oh yeah, I have seen some of that. Yeah, it's it's not because you see these sort of grainy, old black and white films.
Yeah,
everything was like black and white. Oh right, they had green grass then, and
people
were wearing red. And
it's very pastel, which makes me think that it's a little bit artistic interpretation. Filling in the gaps. But yeah, it's very surreal to think about these things that we have become familiar, we've accepted. That's the way it was, but no, it's not, and obviously it's not. Something is lost every day from our collective experience.
Well, that's deep.
And sometimes you just, but again, you're not really discovering it. You're just kind of reappreciating what remains, what you can still, what you could simulate in that. And so working like, for example, in VR, we work with archaeological sites. Sometimes we do cultural heritage stuff, and so people always wanted like, oh, make it like it was. It's like, oh yeah, you do your best. You do your best. No archaeologist wants to do that, because every archaeologist worth their salt is like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea what they were wearing at that time. I can tell you what we have remains of, but we don't know if they were wearing it on their head, if that was a skirt. Like, unless there's a depiction, on the wall, like someone painted a lifestyle scene. But that's a lifestyle scene. We don't know, was that every day for them? In some cases, you could make really strong educated guesses, but so many times, like, the archaeologists are very aware that we don't know that. And so if we create some type of simulated scene, it's like that was the argument in Jurassic Park, which was funny that it wasn't in the film so much, but in the book, it was a big element of it was, we have no idea that's what they were doing or that's what they look like. So you're filling it in because you're filling this fantasy that you have about it. And so I remember when I was a kid, I don't know why this struck me to make this statement. I don't know what we were talking about, but it was 4th grade, and I was like, when we die, eventually we will completely be forgotten. We will not exist. There's no one who will remember us. And this, that was that kind of 10-year-old.
Yeah,
that was not uncommon for me.
When we die, there is nothing.
And and I had some classmates who were like, no, that's not true. Our families will remember us. It's like, yeah, but they're gonna die. And do you know your grandparent? Do you know your great-grandparent?
Yeah.
Eventually, put a number on it. I say 150 years.
Yeah.
No one alive will have ever known you. So, even if they know you, they don't know you. They know elements about you.
Or they knew what you...
Yeah, and then somebody brings up, like, Alexander the Great, which I'm like, I love Alexander the Great.
Right.
I don't know anything about the guy. I don't know that he's... Although I know is that there's an awful lot of stories talked...
What you've been told about it.
But these are legends.
Sure.
So, no matter who it is, that human ceases to exist in this mortal plane.
Got it.
And And these are stories we tell ourselves, which are information, but at some point it's also creative. This is new information. And yeah, I mean that's always stuck with me, and I think it's always great to. I mean, going into record shops, and everyone you get, every great find, kind of reminds you that this is not easy to do. There's a lot of stuff that I will never find.
Yeah.
You know.
For everyone yeah, exactly. For everyone you do, there's one you won't.
Yeah.
And well, we've got another song. I think is it
Yeah.
Maria and Jeff Muldoon?
Yeah, I think we'll have to play that's the last song.
I think we'll have to.
Yeah, we've gone a bit over,
Yeah,
but no
it's
one's
been-
beaten down the door.
I like that.
But but before I want to finish this one thought that there used to be a time where radio wasn't always recorded, or live TV was not all. I
Well,
mean,
they didn't see the value of doing it.
yeah, they didn't. It was not. It was temporal.
That stuff was wiped. That was a lot of. I mean, Top of the Pops BBC show. You got things like David Bowie performances, Beatles
Yeah.
performances. I mean, I'm just naming big names, but for anybody that was into those bands, they're just gone forever. Like
Yeah.
years and years and years of doing it. I think it was like 1976 that they started actually just sort of recording it and keeping it as a sort of habit. But sacrilege, really.
Well, I mean, it's just I would. So we're on a radio show right now,
I mean,
and
yeah.
we're recording.
Exactly.
But part of me really doesn't want to get into the habit of posting that
Uh-huh.
because I really do like this idea that
You
you
get
know
it?
you
It's
had to
there.
be there.
Yeah.
You just had to be there. And
Mhm.
if you weren't there, don't worry, we can talk about it again. But it'll be different. It'll be better, hopefully. Like every iteration, it's just it matters. The iteration matters. It's not just the end goal, and it's not about looking back and saying what a great show that was 3 weeks ago. Yeah, it was, but it's 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Don't get irritated by the iteration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Iteration, irritation. I like that.
so on that point note,
On that
Uh,
bombshell.
we're gonna play our last song,
Yeah.
but I want to say goodbye to our audience because then we're gonna load that up and then let the next group, if there is one. I certainly hope there is one for you, the listener, because there's some really great talent on Coach University Radio
Something there is.
on a Sunday night. But Tim, thank you very much. My
It's been a
absolute pleasure to have
and
you.
a privilege, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
you have to come to Connections, and we'll have a return match.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to that. I was hoping to have an offer to come on to a proper
Proper
show.
show.
Proper show. Yeah, I have listening to. Again, I think I told you, but I haven't told the audience. The only radio show that I have religiously listened to was the Ricky Gervais show,
Oh yeah.
and so they were on XFM for like 4 shows, and then they did. I forget. I think they did a BBC series, a short one, and then they switched into podcasts, and they made that into a TV show actually. But the first 4 years, which is like 300 episodes, it's just I've listened to them all because it's just 3 guys. And what was fascinating is that I have picked up living outside of the United States, and where British English is equally, if not more common. Picked up a lot of phrases and just particular words, which I know if I go back to the U.S., it's going to be really bad a place. Americans don't say proper in that sense, but it's a great word. It's a great word for that thing, and the way you have to really pop your P to get it. But and Ricky Gervais and Steve Merchant and Carl Pilkington all come from 3 different parts of the UK, so their accents were so different. And it was a delightful show just because it was so unscripted and chaotic and really quite amateurish.
Right. And they actually put cartoons on that, didn't they?
For the podcast that came
visual
out of
element,
it,
Yeah.
they did. But those early XFMs, it gave me appreciation for a time that I'm not going to listen to radio. So I'm not driving very much. Thank you for your listening, whoever's out there right
Yeah.
now.
Right.
But I don't have a car, so I don't. Not in the same kind of place that I would be to listen. But yeah, there must have been a time. We didn't talk about it like your earlier years in radio. Like, what a time to be on the radio when it was really part of society. People really, it was.
Well, I didn't say at the beginning I was on hospital radio. I think I told you that the other day. I was on hospital radio in the mid-90s, and literally people died listening to my show.
Yeah, and imagine the weight.
Yeah.
The last thing that they're going to take with them into the hereafter is that last tune you picked. I mean, that is a serious weight and a noble profession.
We weren't allowed to play Stairway to Heaven.
Was that explicit?
That was pretty explicit.
That's awesome.
My last ever show, I played about 3 different versions of it. There was an album that came out that was all, and because I think it's a beautiful song, and
It's a bit long.
Popping my clogs, I wouldn't mind hearing that myself, but. That was the only thing. I think it was like.
That's fabulous, and there must have been more than just, just the lyrics, because there's so many songs that deal with death, and I mean.
Yeah, I suppose it was songs that dealt with heavy stuff, but then where do you draw the line?
Yeah, what's heavy?
What is heavy?
And it depends on how much your mind's been
That's
working
a
out.
whole other show, isn't it?
Yeah. So
What's
what was
heavy?
this last song we want to play?
This was Brazil, and it's by Jeff and Maria Mulder.
Yeah, so we're gonna play Brazil. Everyone have a great night. Enjoy the last song, and
Maybe go to Brazil in your own head.
and what time is your when is your show on?
My show, if you want to listen to it, is on Saturday, and it's on 94.9 FM, and you can get it on www.atticradio.com.tr, and it goes out at 6 p.m. Turkish time.
What a perfect time on the weekend.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah.
Just,
All right, everyone.
good
So,
night.
check out that show next weekend. Check out our show again next Sunday. I'm sure I'll find a great guest, but I don't have one at the
Well, there you
moment.
go. We'll get working on that one. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure and a privilege.
Yeah, this is Brazil.
Take care.